listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched on the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas, and Shane is running late, but he should be here at some point. But that still means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Right on. I hope everyone is doing okay this morning. The voice in your ear as you head to your day, your work, or wherever you're going, or for that matter, just getting dressed. Welcome to the day. Hope you guys are doing well. But let's get to the headlines. You guys are in the news. Yesterday, in the United States, there were 106,422 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,887 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 88,612 cases per day, a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 66% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,671,658 human beings across the United States and has killed unnecessarily 719,725 men, women, and children in this country. In national news, Shannon Marie O'Connor, a 47-year-old from California, is being charged with 39 criminal charges, including counts of sexual battery, child molestation, providing alcohol to minors, all by helping her son throw parties at her own house. O'Connor would encourage her son to bring friends over, consistently provide alcohol, and encourage drinking and sexual acts, oftentimes with children unable to give consent. Remember, there is a difference between being a cool parent and throwing responsibility to the wind. Difference indeed. Very interesting. A New York City police officer is in custody after allegedly shooting two women, killing one at her home in Brooklyn. The off-duty cop arrived at her girlfriend's house and discovered her with another woman. She then fired possibly multiple times into the stranger's chest, killing her shortly after. The unfaithful partner was shot once in the stomach and expected to survive. That is not part of the job responsibility of being a cop. Not typically, anyway. The committee investigating the January 6th riot has issued a subpoena to former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, who is believed to have repeatedly attempted to use his position to overturn the 2020 election and interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. In international news, a man with a bow and an arrow killed 5 people. I don't mean to laugh, it's just the Hawkeye popped into my head. A man armed with a bow and arrow killed 5 people and wounded in a small Norwegian town just before being arrested. The man had a confrontation with the police, but has been brought into custody. Senators Amy Klobuchar and Chuck Grassley are leading the charge to pass a bipartisan antitrust bill to hit big tech companies. The bill is specifically targeted to curb platforms promoting and favoring their products and services over other sources. Amazon and Alphabet's Google are on top of this list. Facebook and Apple are also in the conversation, but the main focus right now is Amazon and Google. And of course, this came out because it was kind of big news that Amazon was, this had been known, but apparently there were documentation, especially, I need to pull up the link for the clip, but in India, where it was very clear that they were basically using the platform to shaft companies that had a particular product while basically putting their own product up front. And look, every incentive in the universe, especially from a company that is there to make cash, is there for them to do that. Why wouldn't they do that if they can maximize their profit by doing so? Hey, that's a nice product you have. Let's put your product on the 3rd and 5th page, and let's put our new product that does exactly what your product does on the 1st, even if we encounter this product purely from your product. Yeah, it's somewhat gross. It has been allowed to fester for a while, and so the question is, are Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, and Chuck Grassley, Republican, going to be the lead on this front? We'll see. A fire in a residential building in South Taiwan has killed 46 people and injured another 41. The building housed residents as well as restaurants, karaoke bars, and other small businesses. The government is looking into the fire to determine whether arson was to blame or not. Yeah, that's a pretty big tragedy. Today, holidays, National Mammogram Day. Yes, get one. White Cane Safety Day. No clue what that is. And National Mushroom Day. And that, another one. Have fun with your psychedelics. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Wow. What's going on, my man? You doing okay?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Jamarl?
Doing all right. Good to see you. Always a good thing when your co-host comes and sits there and you can see his face and, have the back and forth. COVID numbers, 1,887. Still same number of deaths for whatever reason that you would expect. But again, the numbers still going down.
Yeah.
106,422. So at some point, this should drop. So fingers crossed on that front, as long as there's no new variant, I suppose. The Committee on the January 6th riot basically issuing a subpoena to Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, who is believed to have repeatedly attempted to use his position to overturn the 2020 election. Well, I would say this. Whereas the FBI has basically come on and says, look, we don't believe that this was a concerted effort by these right-wing organizations to basically have a putsch attempt on the Capitol. And even, to have a run into the Capitol and basically invade and everything else. They were basically jazzed up in the moment to do that. Whether it's Trump saying, walk to the Capitol, even though Trump doesn't have a permit to get these people to walk to the Capitol, whether it's the insistence and continuous insistence that Biden is not legit, so you're basically free to do whatever in pursuit of liberty and putting me back in that presidential stature forever. Whatever it was from the standpoint of the audience, I can accept that the audience got jazzed up in the moment to go raiding the Capitol. I think it's a secondary thing, though, to figure out what these guys were doing as a brain trust, meaning what was Trump doing as the crowd basically barraged the Capitol? Why didn't he help and come out and saying, look, guys, cut that out, ixnay on the, attack the Capitol way or something to that effect? And more importantly, since he was pushing his people, even Mike Pence was susceptible to it. Mike Pence, calling Dan Quayle saying, Dan, is there any way for me at all to help the president do? And Dan is like, no, there's no way for you to do this. The man who couldn't spell, potato, definitely knew his legal responsibilities. I think it's more interesting, though, for the question of, what was going on in the brain trust? Because the brain trust was thinking about that. Meaning whatever the crowd were, the useful idiots of the bunch, is secondary. And I think I've said this before, nuance, and I create a split between these things. I think it's secondary to say, what were you guys doing? What were you guys thinking? And what methods or actions were you guys taking in pursuit of this putsch attempt? And, they can clam up, I suppose. But between the riot and the trials and everything else that's going on when they were prosecuting the rioters and whatnot, I don't see a concerted effort there.
That's the thing.
Yeah. I'm more curious about what was going on at the top. What's your thoughts?
It just seems like there wasn't much, or at least if there was, you would think that would have been relayed to the people on the ground.
Yeah.
If there were some concerted effort.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people on the top, you could argue by trying to contest the election to such an extent, and Trump trying to get Pence to do that.
Yeah.
People can make those arguments. I think those are the most, specifically against Trump. Yeah, of course, other than him just not immediately recommending that all of his followers stand down right after they started to raid, because there was like several hour long period there where you were waiting. Maybe not.
Keep in mind, it was like hours before the cops even responded with backup and whatnot. All that stuff was weird.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
No, absolutely an insane event where if you were, I was glued to the TV for the entire duration of that thing. It's one of the few events in recent history. Although early on I was saying that it's as big as the Civil War. I'm not 100% sure about that. There are other, there were serious fire bombings and raids and killings in the Capitol building itself back in the 70s.
It's just a jarring thing.
70s. But yeah, no, it is a big thing.
Especially, the whole point of it is stop the steal, meaning we don't believe that this guy is really president, so we're here to give support to stop the steal.
Yeah.
And then it gets so jazzed up where it's like, hey, we're letting in the Capitol. Let's go to the Capitol. Let's go to the Capitol. Let's take a dump in Nancy Pelosi's office. Let's take this computer, et cetera, et cetera.
Kind of, but also, there are images where it's just like them walking down, I think it was the portrait gallery inside the White House.
Just look like
and they're
visitors.
walking around like visitors inside of velvet ropes, literally lined up, so people don't get too close to the paintings. And the rioters, insurrectionaries or whatever, are inside the velvet robes, just walking down like they're just visiting the Capitol. It's just a bizarre. I don't know what came after that, but
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I've seen those images too, and so it's hard for me to take some of it seriously. But then on the other hand, you see the footage, of course, and they're literally bludgeoning police
fighting
officers,
cops, like
breaking in. And of course, that's why Ashley Babbitt died.
I mean, some of that stuff is shocking, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's very few and far between where I've seen people square off against cops and just like, yeah, let's do this, and they're like throwing punches with cops and whatnot, and they're like exchanging hands.
It's pretty rare in the States here, unless it's like BLM or like some, they do like Antifa. Like I remember May Day.
Yeah.
Early. This was back, I think, pretty sure early Trump first term. Either that or just before it. I'm trying to remember the exact timing of it. But Antifa May Day regularly gets down, but it's restricted to a few small areas. That's over in Seattle. National yearly.
Portland, I think, was one
holiday.
of the places.
Yeah, some of this stuff has been going down for a while, but it's restricted. And of course, it's not at the freaking Capitol.
Yeah, right. And it didn't, and these cops didn't seem like they were getting back up or anything. It seemed like they were basically left to their own devices to basically fight a mob. It was very strange stuff to watch.
But
and
also,
it's somewhat jarring.
Sorry, that's where you were talking about the brain trust. Coming back to that idea for a second, wasn't Nancy Pelosi one of the people who was in charge of whether the police forces would be there that day?
Now that I'm not sure.
Wasn't she? I see. It's been a little while since I looked into this.
It's been a while.
Like the sergeant at arms for the House or something like that. She would be the person to tell that person, one of people. I'm not saying it's her sole responsibility, but she's one of a number of people to be like, hey, let's beef up the crew. So
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Come stop the Steel Day.
Because there were a few things. They weren't supposed to be marching there in the first place because there was no permit for a group. Somewhere, somebody had this feeling that if you send in the military, they're going to think that Donald Trump is trying to take the government. Yeah. So let's not do that. And it's like, what? Then you had something with, what is it, Kevin? It wasn't McCarthy. It was the other cat that was working with Trump. Like, it was just a lot of weird phenomena going on at the exact same time.
Yes.
The Nancy Pelosi thing, I heard something about that. I don't entirely remember the specifics of it, though. But no, it's just weird in and of itself. But I guess my point in all this is, the January 6th Commission, considering the fact it was at the Capitol and everything else, I do think there's some reality to, okay, if we're going to go to such an extent where we're going to do these investigations and trying to put people in prison over this riot as if there was a concerted effort, despite the fact that the FBI had spooks in the audience and are saying, look, there was no concerted effort on us. At the very least, the people who did have every incentive in the world to push for a concerted effort are just the people who are in charge. That's where you go. At the very least, there should be some level of an investigation there. What were they thinking? What were they doing? What were they attempting to do? And was any of that stuff illegal in the pursuit of this particular event? And if the answer is no, okay, fair enough. But they don't even want to have that conversation. They're like, yeah, that's okay. And Republicans are like, yeah, that's okay. Because what Republicans know is on some level, this is there to perpetuate January 6th. Meaning whatever the reality of it is, it's also to perpetuate January 6th and be able to point to Republicans and say they were perfectly, backing this thing up and everything else. But that's the way I see it. I don't know. It's January 6th was just weird and interesting and disturbing on so many levels to me, just from what it inspired from. Let me ask you this. If January 6th wasn't, we need to put Trump back in office, meaning stop the steal from this election, but instead it was healthcare, COVID, all of these people died, we need to expand, I don't know, Social Security, whatever, border security. If it was something like that, where it was just kind of like yellow vests, diffuse, direct anger and resentment at the government, giving this kind of voice to it, how would you feel about it then? Would that be fair game, or would it still be like, too far?
I would understand their motives more, and I would empathize with them more, but I would still think that it's an ineffective way to seek what they want. But it would get a lot more traction with the public in general and the media. I'm not saying it would be supported. I'm saying compared to what happened, compared to the stuff with Trump, mainstream media, I don't know how they'd respond to it. Depends on how it get painted.
Oh, the thing is, they would hate it. I think the public would back it.
But here's the thing. Just imagine this for a second. What would you need to have that actually happen? You'd need to have a big infrastructure in some way. That kind of thing, it's not like a flash in the pan that just comes out of nowhere and turns into nothing. That would require quite a bit of work. Some mobilization by some group of people in a party or outside of it willing to put that kind of thing together. You know what I mean, right? So you would see the evidence, you would see the after effects of that kind of organization. I'm just saying we would live in a different political environment at that point,
Well, I guess my thought is,
there would be this new player in the room.
This didn't require that huge amount of political put together, at least not in a way where it was this kind of concerted effort by some
though.
right-wing group.
Trump was talking about this repeatedly. Trump was talking about this for months. This was Trump's thing. Don't, stop the steal, stop the steal, stop the steal. For everybody who supported the president, that suddenly became the thing.
Oh, I see what you mean. You would need some kind of concerted focus on that. Agreed.
If Occupy hadn't happened in, when it happened, but it happened in 2020, it kicked in through COVID, and somehow miraculously people got pissed about how all these big banks were getting the bailout from the government instead of them. Right. They were suffering at home, that kind of thing. They got pissed. Occupy started. People were safely, socially distancing in public squares or whatever, and protesting. And then they decided to raid the Capitol at some point. I don't know exactly how that works. But I can see that kind of thing happening. I'm just saying.
I agree with that.
That would get a totally different take in the public side.
I agree with that.
What would that require?
Because it wouldn't be random. I mean, that wouldn't be random. That would be no, that's a good point.
In the same way that Occupy was a new player in the room back in the day, in terms of the political dynamics and the Overton window and what was being talked about, Occupy and its topics became the topics du jour for months, for years. Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
That set up Obama. I mean, not set up, but it was of Obama's time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Despite the fact Obama was still attacking the encampments and everything else, he still used the rhetoric of 99% to try to get elected.
Exactly.
All right, let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back talking about Kamala Harris and a weird, strange, cringy, inauthentic new video of her leading the NASA Council and apparently finding stunt kids to back her up in this pursuit. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There has been a sighting. The invisible woman, Kamala Harris, there has been a sighting. Now, Kamala Harris, despite being vice president, is often just basically absent, not just from conversation, but also from audio and video. It's like seeing Bigfoot in the wilderness at certain points. It's like, whoa, I think I saw Kamala Harris sighting. And so this particular sighting, she shows up on a NASA video, or I guess a video with kids. She's apparently head of the National Space Council, just like I suppose she was head of dealing with immigration and head of whatever else Joe Biden gave her that she decided not to do. But Kamala, I'm not president yet, Harris, is dealing with a bunch of kids and having this kind of weird, awkward, inauthentic conversation with these kids where, A, they're stunt kids, meaning they're real kids, but they're kids who are basically hired actors as opposed to just having kids. So on one level of inauthenticity, you have that. And then you have her with these kind of strange inflections in the way that she's talking about this stuff. Let's hear the clip. Don't take my word for it. Let's play the clip. Kamala Harris, stunt kids, sell space.
I just love the idea of exploring the unknown. And then there's other things that we just haven't figured out or discovered yet. To think about so much that's out there that we still have to learn. Like, I love that. I love that. And so I'm very excited about the Space Council. We're going to learn so much as we increasingly, I think, are curious and interested in the potential for the discoveries and the work we can do in space. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about. But the other, you guys are going to see, you're going to literally see the craters on the moon with your own eyes. Oh my goodness. With your own eyes, I'm telling you, it is going to be unbelievable.
You're going to see the craters of the moon, Shane. And not through some digital device, but through your own eyes, buddy. And they're like, oh my God, yes, we're going to see the craters of the moon. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Now, if you're watching the video, she's basically sitting around with a bunch of these kids. They're kind of like in a circle. And she's having this conversation. And part of me thinks, why can't you just be authentic? Why can't you spend a week making this video in order to kind of give this and I guess push this notion of the thing forward? Why did you have to hire kids for the first place as opposed to just finding kids who are part of the program? And on the second front, why can't you just, for once in your life, even to just kids, just be a person, just be authentic? And the way that you're kind of talking about this stuff and the way that these guys are responding to you, as opposed to this kind of phony, dramatic, you guys are going to see the moon craters with your own eyes. It's like, okay, thank you, Kamala Harris. Hey, I don't even believe that's true, by the way. How are you going to ensure that all of these kids end up in the moon? And I understand you have all these billionaires that are going into space right now, but I don't necessarily know how that translates into these few kids, actors at that, seeing the craters on the moon. Let's hear the second video, because there's 2 clips of this that I want to play. Don't let people tell you who you are. And I love this, because I think murmuring under her voice is, F you, Tulsi Gabbard. Can't tell me who I am. Let's play this clip.
Well, welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Ready to start? Okay, go.
So, I may not always be fast to take my parents' advice, but what is the best advice your parents have given you that perhaps you can share with us today?
You know, one of the most important pieces of advice that I can offer you guys, and I want you to really remember this, never let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. Never let anybody suggest to you that you are what they think you should be. You tell them who you are and who you know you are and what you intend to be. Got that?
Yes.
All right. I got more advice. You just let me
And I'm going to be president one day. President of the United States. The moment I heard that, I thought of Tulsi Gabbard. And I thought of the 60-second rundown. And Kamala Harris, this is your life. And at the end of that statement, she couldn't even say, no, it wasn't. Or she could only recoil at what was being said because everything that she said there was true. Don't let people tell you who you are unless they have a pretty good window into who you are because you have all sorts of videos and you've done all sorts of things that have not necessarily been to the betterment of the people you've engaged in, whether that's putting stoners in prison and laughing about it, whether that's threatening a mother with homeless mother at that, with truancy violations that you were going to put her in prison and using that as this kind of feel-good story as you creepily laugh at the various situations. I mean, it's one thing after the next, keeping people in prison longer so they can fight fires at a rate of, 10 cents away from slavery or something to that effect. It's one thing after the next that have not necessarily been this record of love and light, but has been opposite of that. Whether those kids realize it or not, I don't know. I would say, though, that the don't let people tell you who you are thing, yeah, murmuring under her breath to Tulsi. She's still pissed at that. What do you thought, Shane? I took this just being wooden and authentic. It's like, if you're going to do something like this, one, I'm a bit slightly salty just because she's been invisible for the most of the time. And the things that Biden has basically given her to do seem to either not get done or she doesn't necessarily want to associate herself with those things, immigration being, I guess, the big one. But it just feels wooden. It feels like she's trying to play the role of somebody who's authentic and in doing so, inauthentic. It's very strange. Even the inflections and everything else. It's just like, okay, you're head of the National Space Council. Can you just talk to the kids as if they're basically kids but with sense, as opposed to this kind of phony back and forth? What are your thoughts? Am I being too hard on this?
Well, a couple of things. For one thing, just the timing. These were recorded between August 12th and 14th. Earlier this year. That was, of course, when the Taliban was making its offensive on Kabul, like within the days before our defeat and surrender and withdrawal. Not surrender, but you get my point. So that's thing one. Thing two, looking at the video and just listening to it too, sounds like B-roll. Sounds like if people are involved in film work or any kind of video work, TV work, B-roll is the footage that you cut to when like there's music playing or there's a voiceover or there's something like that. You want, you edit away from the main shot for a second. You switch into a side shot that's like reminiscent to the main one or something like that. So this, you can think of like during a campaign ad, this just playing in the background, her talking to kids, that kind of thing. I'm just saying, there's somebody who's worked in the industry for technically, a number of years. That's what it reminds me of. Looking at it, listening to it, that kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that much. Having said that, it's it is flat. She's not good at it. Just looking at it and listening to her, the things she's saying make no sense. Granted, she's people do that when they're trying to act. They'll just sort of
be on the
say
moon.
stuff. They'll just say stuff exactly because often you're not supposed to hear what they're saying. You're just supposed to see this footage.
I see what you mean.
In the
It's like a
background,
montage.
not listening to them. Just like they're talking. She's talking to kids. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's what it reminds me of. I'm not saying that's what it is. I don't have any inside knowledge, but that's what it seems like to me.
I feel you.
But also, she's kind of talking. She's kind of baby talking to them.
It's that too. It's
That's
like
what's irritating
these
about
aren't
it.
like 3-year-olds.
Just commenting on it as a piece. She's baby talking to them. It's kind of irritating to me. I don't like, and she's saying nothing. And so imagining her as a mom, she would be the worst mom. She would be like just constantly talking down to you. You'd be trying to get answers, and she would just be like, "It's okay." Not actually ever getting to reality. I don't know.
And again, these are like 12, 13, 14. Like these aren't children where you need to kind of baby talk in that way.
No.
Yeah, it's just very strange stuff. She has look, I've said it before, Kamala Harris will never be president. And that has everything to do with this kind of unlikability thing that just comes off her in waves every time she opens her mouth. And which means that Democrats are going to have a hard way of trying to figure out who their person is going to be after Biden. And that's assuming that Biden gets through the next, 2 years with good health and everything else where he'd be willing to make that run again. But it's not her. I'm telling you, it is not her. If you run her, she will lose. That's just my take on that. One of the other things that just came out recently, too, was Biden's approval rating we were looking at the plummet for independents. African Americans plummeted by like 20 points in 2 months. Now, that is brutal polling loss. We have Margaret Kimberly here to talk about it towards the end, but it's just interesting to point that out. I mean, his administration has basically been taking a hit and is basically ticking down. And, I would place that strongly on this notion of you told people that you were going to give them $2,000. You didn't do that. You told people that $15 and less was a starvation wage. Yet you didn't push for that. And now you have this thing where 2 of your Democrats are basically preventing you from getting anything accomplished, which means you basically got nothing accomplished. Not even the stuff on marijuana, not even the stuff on criminal justice. All of that stuff just comes across as lacking. And, one of the key constituencies of the Democratic Party looking at that and shaking their heads is not a good look. I mean, that's not a good thing. And I've been one of those people who said for a long time, you don't owe the Democratic Party your vote. And if you're an African American, you give a vote based on what you get in return for that particular vote, not something that's just kind of automatically given in a way that Joe Biden was like, well, if you're not blue, if you don't vote for me, you're not black, that nonsense. They should never even have that link together where he would even say that, even give them the impression of that. At times, you got to be willing to walk. And, the 20%, I suspect that 20% is looking like, this guy, man, we're stuck in the same nonsense again. Yeah, that's going to
same as it ever was.
Take issue. Yeah, same as it ever was, despite what he was saying in rhetoric. It's I think what it is, that in this election, for whatever reason, maybe more so than previous elections, what the person was saying and what they were saying was going to be part of their agenda they're being attached to it more so, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But it seems like it's stuck on him in a much deeper way than it would have been, let's say, for Obama, when he would be like attacking Hillary Clinton for those not mandates. What are those things called? It was where you had to basically, I believe it was some kind of mandate or something like that Obama basically attacked Hillary for, but ended up doing himself. And so it was like, well, he's able to slide on that. But Biden doesn't seem to be able to slide on this stuff. And I don't know if it's just because he hasn't really gotten anything accomplished. So, whatever it was, your issue was like, I was for the $15. That guy remembers it because he dropped it. Or I was for the health care. And again, the guy remembers it, so he drops it. Or I was for whatever your thing or your issue was that you were basically putting your hooks into, saying, this is what I want from this president.
Maybe, but also I don't still feel like what people probably aren't going to respond to Biden as a president in the same way. Pardon me. People aren't going to respond normally to Biden as a president in the same way they didn't respond normally to Trump as a president. And for the same reason, Trump was clearly an outlier. Biden is the guy who came in to replace the outlier. He's being judged in terms of how much stability he's offering after Trump. I think what really screwed him, yes, these bills failing, I would want to add to that. I think those are huge factors. But also COVID, sure, but also Afghanistan.
Yeah.
If you remember, that was a real downturn, especially in the media. So for most people who don't pay close attention to politics, but just get their general opinions about how the president's doing from occasionally watching TV news and, hearing stuff from friends, conversations, that kind of thing. The big thing that dominated, and I remember talking about it because I was on a trip at the time, and it wasn't just a coincidence, it was like a big event, was Afghanistan. That was a real time when everybody suddenly was criticizing Biden for something. And so if everybody on TV news is criticizing Biden for something for weeks, that's going to seep out into public opinion in a big way. And if you look back at the polling, I'm pretty sure that's when the numbers started to, shift quite a bit more.
2 months ago.
And now they're down where they are. So I think that's another big factor too. And that makes sense. And he should get hit. He should get a hit in public opinion for that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the reason I sort of set this up is, okay, he's not being treated normally like a president. I don't know if that's going to matter necessarily come 2024. I don't know. I'll put it like this.
I mean, 2022. I mean, even
or
midterms.
2022.
Yeah.
But for the president specifically, people are so afraid of another Trump that I keep going back and forth on this. It might just not matter. They might just, try to rabble-rouse for more support from Democrats, try to figure out a better Democrat for 2024 in the intervening years.
I guess the question is, what if it's not Trump? Then what? I mean, because Democrats have built so much around this notion of Trump is a monster, Trump is evil, Trump is terrifying, Trump tried to, take America. But what if it's not Trump that's on the marquee?
I'm pretty sure it'd be more Trumpy than Trump if it's not Trump. That's where
probably would be Trumpian.
The party's been emboldened at this point by repeated Democratic failures and Trump's notable success. He was, he's pretty successful. I mean, clearly only one term. I'm not saying, but in terms of a lot of the pushback and in terms of being able to sort of rouse the party.
He's taken the party, at least the culture of the party.
He totally has, and he's still an extant force within it, and that's not going to fade away anytime soon. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about that.
Let's do this. Let's take a break. We're going to bring in the producers for two conversations this morning. One on the issue with David Chappelle and the quote-unquote cancellation of his last video, Closer. I thought the video was utterly hilarious, but we're going to get into it. And also on Stephen Smith, who went on a pretty brutal rant against Kyrie Irving on his not taking the vaccine. And we're going to see if Stephen Smith has a point on this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So, vaccinations have been one of those things that we've been talking about in regards to sports. And there's been a mandate on getting the vaccination, meaning you have every right to decline. By the same token, your team has every right to prevent you from playing. Look, I've made the point that if you're going to be on the field this close in a confined space, it's somewhat of a safety issue to have due diligence. And regardless of whatever your choice is, you still have this notion of your teammates need to be safe, want to be safe. And if you have upped your chances of getting potentially ill or spreading that issue or that virus, they're not necessarily wrong for looking at you in a particular way and having you sit on the bench. Now, I'm going to get your takes on this, but let's hear Stephen Smith start this off. Stephen Smith, loudmouth. I typically don't like him. But nevertheless, let's hear his point. He was pretty strong with it.
Kyrie Irving has made over $200 million plus. You signed on to be a member of the Brooklyn Nets and got KD and James Harden to do it. The objective was to establish a legacy and a new era in New York City that didn't belong to the Knicks. Let's create our own legacy and our own brand because the New York Knicks already got their own. Let's do our own thing. They came to you and you ain't there. And you ain't there. And Marcus brought up a little while ago when he talked about, yeah, you do have a right not to take the vaccine. That's not what this discussion is about. We know everybody has the right to take it or not take it. What we're saying is we might think it's unwise considering the circumstances because, as you pointed out, Molly, lives have been lost, okay? Yeah. And we get that part. Obviously, that's the most important part. But my point is, even with all of that said, you still are now proclaiming, according to the reports, you're not anti-vaccine. So if you're not anti-vaccine, you know what this comes across as? You just looking for, this is just the latest excuse for you to get off of work until you're ready to come to work. This is the same Kyrie Irving. Listen, let me put it in perspective. We keep forgetting this is important. Before the bubble, he got hurt.
Yeah.
He was out. Didn't want the dudes to participate in the bubble as a vice president on the Players Association. They're not a part of it anyway. He's gone. So he was gone from playing from March until December, came back and disappeared for 2 weeks. He needed a break. Who does that? Kyrie does that. Because Kyrie tries to have rules apply to himself that don't apply to anybody else. And anytime you're about that, you don't need to be a part of a team. If he were a boxer, I wouldn't say a word because he's in the ring by himself in the end of the day. This is a basketball team. It's a basketball franchise that he signed up to play for. And to me, he's being selfish.
All right. One more. We have one more clip of Smith. Let's play that one.
But I've been covering the NBA now for almost 25 years. I mean, this is some of the stupidest nonsense I've ever seen. Just flat out stupid. So let me get this straight. So if the reports are true, because we don't know whether they are or not, okay, but let's give credit to Sham and others who have reported this. It is what it is. Let's go with that, okay? If it is true, Jay, if it is true, Marcus, so you don't have a problem with taking the vaccine, your position is that you're going to sit up there and compromise the championship aspirations of an organization you signed on to represent. You coaxed Kevin Durant into signing on to represent. You played the role in coaxing James Harden into signing on to represent. You're going to compromise all of that because you want to give a voice to the voiceless. Really? And how is that going to work out for you, Kyrie Irving? You're going to disappear from the game of basketball? Who the hell is going to be interested in what you have to say when you have proven that you can't even be trusted enough to do your damn job? A job you volunteered for. This ain't the military where you were drafted. You chose to play basketball. You chose to enter the NBA. You chose to sign that contract as a free agent to go to the Brooklyn Nets. You chose Brooklyn as your destination. You chose the Nets franchise to represent. You asked KD and James Harden to come on board with you in Brooklyn to establish your own legacy, and then you leave them hanging.
Let's stop right there. All right, two things. He says he's not an anti-vaxxer. I mean, he says he's the only member of the Nets that remains unvaccinated. He denied that he's anti-vaccine and expressed support for vaccinated citizens. All right. So if you're not an anti-vaxxer, then we can't say that you just have this ideological thing against the vaccination. Okay. On the second point, Smith is making this about, look, dude, you're part of a team, and you're an intricate part of that team, and you're basically, you said you're not an anti-vaxxer, and yet you're not getting the vaccine and basically choosing to sit out in lieu of this. Look, I am not a huge basketball person, so I'm going to hand this over to the person who is more so into the sports thing. What were your I mean, is Smith right that Irving has this kind of, I guess, thing in his head about either sitting out longer than what would typically be sitting out, or this kind of selfishness associated with him in lieu of the team? I mean, and even from the standpoint that this is really about the vaccine at all. It's about you being a member of a team of Brooklyn Nets.
Stephen A. is right on point. This is who Kyrie Irving is. It's who Kyrie Irving has always been.
Yeah.
Kyrie suffers from smartest man in the room syndrome. So whatever the topic is, whatever side you take, he's going to take the opposite just to say that he did, just to say that he's, like Stephen A. just said, he's giving a voice to the voiceless. Kyrie, at times, his heart, I think, is truly in the right place. He's done a lot for urban communities. He's done a lot for African-American communities. He's always on the front lines. Whenever something goes down, he's right there. I'll give him credit for that. But at the same time, Kyrie Irving does not love the game of basketball anymore. That's completely evident. Stephen A. touched on how when the bubble was getting started, he didn't want the players to go. Mind you, he's already not going because your team had to be in a certain part of the standings to go. His team was already eliminated from that. He still didn't want the rest of the guys to go. Then, which I don't necessarily disagree with, he wanted the players to go and start their own league, which I can somewhat agree with because I do believe, at least in the NBA, the players are the league.
Right.
But last year, it really showed its face. Kyrie had moments, weeks at a time, where he's just a no-show, just no call, no shows. So this is the NBA. Yeah. He is one of the highest paid players in the league, one of the highest profile players in the league. Right now, Kyrie is just showing it's always going to be about him, and it's never going to be pertaining to basketball. It's always going to be something. If it's not vaccines, it'll be something else. It could come up, whatever the topic is next week, it'll be something else, and he'll use that as a reason to just go rogue, and he can't be trusted. And the reality is the Nets don't even need him. The Nets were 2 inches away from making the NBA Finals last year. If Kevin Durant's shoe was like a size 11 and not an 11 and a half, they would be probably NBA champions last year. So they really don't need him. And I think this is the thing that's different from all the other times in his career where he's pulled stunts like this. He's been able to have teams kind of at their knees for him because he's a very good player, very good player. But right now, he plays for a team that has 2 potentially top 5 players in the NBA. They don't need him. So I think the Nets are going to call his bluff. And at the end of the day, Kyrie's going to he needs to retire. Yeah. He already said if the Nets trade him, he's going to retire. The Nets said yesterday they're not going to extend him. I think his basketball career needs to be over so that he can go do whatever it is Kyrie wants to do. And he's a flat earther for content.
A pharmacological flat earther. All right, so you were shaking your head saying, yeah, he's right. This guy.
Yeah. When I was listening, first off, Stephen Smith, wow, what a rebel rouser. I was like feeling it. I think you're right, and I think Cordell's spot on. Like, this is grade A Kyrie. Yeah. Like, he's always had a problem. There's always been a problem getting him in the room. Problem is, he has in history just been so darn good.
Yeah.
You know, he's like the top star player that gets such an attitude about it. And either you've got one of 2 options. You can either bow and just let him do what he wants to do, and you've got to deal with it, or you like bench him out of principle once in a while.
Yeah.
They never benched him out of principle. He was always like not punished and frankly rewarded for just being there when he was. And so then it was kind of like he wanted it to be his organization built around him. Mm-hmm. What I disagree with is I do think the Nets kind of need him. Because I mean, look at the All-Star Lakers right now. Like, they're building super teams yet again. And so, like, I thought when Kyrie went to the Nets and he got Harden and why am I blanking right now? Durant on the team. I was so excited. I was a previous Knicks fan. I was so let down by the Knicks.
Well, that's like a super
every
team at that
single
point, right?
year. Well, not necessarily. I mean, you have 3 big players. Super team is the Lakers.
That's a super team. That's like
Lakers,
3 top 9 players in the league. That's a super team.
Yeah. So I mean, 3 players is you can do some damage if you're going up against other strong teams. And I've always said, like, when Kyrie went and then there was KD and Harden, their biggest problem is going to be keeping them on the court. Mm-hmm. Because KD is built like a chicken, an 8-foot tall chicken. He's got no muscle on his bones, so he can get hurt very easily. But he's a phenomenal player.
Yeah.
He just doesn't play with a big body because he doesn't really have a huge body. And then Kyrie is just like, you can't count on him.
Yeah.
And Harden doesn't play defense. But they're all phenomenal scorers.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think they do need him to get there, especially going against some other monster teams. My other thing with the vaccine, I think you have to keep in mind, he said he's not anti-vax. Mm-hmm. With this specifically, there is a very big camp that says, like, well, look, we're not anti-vax. It's just this one is very different.
But
so to be fair, you should adjust that side of the conversation. I'm not backing it.
No, all I'm saying is, yeah, okay, if he doesn't like the mRNA technology, fair enough. There are other vaccines that are just traditional vaccines. Like, even that part, like, it doesn't entirely make sense.
It's the fastest vaccine that's been pushed out in this country, though.
Yeah.
So, like, I understand where the skepticism is coming. I think that the science outweighs that skepticism, but there is a distinction between anti-vax, like I don't trust vaccines, and this one. Because this one's been dividing way more people.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you think he's using that as an excuse based on his own prior record for this stuff? Or, okay. So okay. So
but it's weird because, like, you would think that people would use something like this to stay hot in the media, to get some sort of money or contract out of it. It's weird because the only motivation I can think of is Kyrie just doesn't want to play.
Yeah.
Because he already is getting all the money. He's already been in the news. Like, he's already, like, relied upon in an organization and a team. What else could he be after besides, like, I don't want to go into work?
Yeah, that's what Smith was saying.
And Kyrie even said one of the reasons he used as to why he doesn't want to get the vaccine is that he doesn't want to be a poster boy for this agenda, the whole vaccine agenda, which is ironic because, of course,
he's the poster boy.
He's going to be the poster boy for the other side. I mean, it's who you are, the platform you have. It doesn't matter what stance you take. You're going to be a part of whatever side that is. So I just found that to be completely laughable. And this is a guy, like I said, this is just a part of who he is. It's his track record. I mean, he was with LeBron James in Cleveland, and he left Cleveland because he wanted to be the guy.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Goes to Boston, and Boston is just not the same team anymore.
He didn't
with
like
Kyrie.
Scottie Pippen. He didn't want to be Scottie Pippen.
He didn't. But in reality, you're going to be Scottie Pippen if you're playing next to LeBron James. That's just the reality.
What do you think, Shane?
I have no thoughts. You guys know so much more about this stuff.
Same here. I'm like, I'm listening to this like, okay, wow. this is vastly outstrips the knowledge on this stuff. I hit this, it's funny, I hit this from, I guess, two angles. I was looking at this more from the vaccine angle thinking, is this guy really an anti-vaxxer? And if so, but the moment that he says, I'm not against the vaccine, then it's like, okay, so maybe Smith has a point. Your team, look, your team needs you. It's a group effort, right? It's not like you're playing chess and you're the only person there. At that point,
from what everyone's saying, Kyrie he's way too individualistic and he's full of himself.
Yeah.
And from what you've said, what kind of activism work has he done, Cordell? You mentioned he's been in the right places at the right times.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of the police shooters, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people had a lot of time on their hands. The NBA had a stoppage at one point. So during the George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor situations, like Kyrie was right there. And not even that. Even for women's sports, Kyrie has donated his own money and given it to a lot of the WNBA players when their league had stopped because they don't make, obviously, what the NBA players make. So their union isn't the same. So Kyrie, like, gave money of his own.
I mean, it sounds
so he is a good-hearted dude at times, but sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle
sounds like
because he's about himself.
Sounds like he's ready to retire. I'm sorry for cutting in.
Is that what it is?
I agree.
It sounds like he's ready to retire. Because you said that if they tried to move him to another team,
he will retire.
If he says that, it's like, okay, he's already in that mindset. Well, all this stuff hits, COVID hits. Maybe maybe the rest of the public aren't the only ones who feel like, hey, maybe I can just stay at home.
It's his excuse almost.
All the time now. Maybe, he's made some money.
I mean, he's forcing their hand. You say, if you trade me, you're going to retire,
and
but you don't want to get the vaccine.
Has been vaccinated. That's the other catch. Every other player on the Nets apparently has been vaccinated.
What choice does he have? He doesn't want to play.
Making this point, it's like you're playing close physical contact with your other teammates. You're not on the field wearing a mask. At least I don't think that would look utterly bizarre if these guys are running up and down the court with a mask on.
He does in practice. He does wear a mask in practice.
So are they going to wear a mask in the game? Yeah, that's what I mean. So you have opponents and you have your own teammates. Close physical contact, and you need on some level due diligence to ensure that stuff either lowering the chance of spread or at the very least knowing that the person is not infected. And I this is one of those cases where it's like you're putting them in an unreasonable position by putting your other teammates at a higher risk than they would have been if you would have just gotten the vaccination. And this wouldn't have even been an issue one way or the other. You wouldn't be part of, well, I don't want to be a part of their agenda. Or otherwise, if you would have gotten the vaccine, considering all of your other teammates got it, and it wouldn't even be in the news as a news factor. Shane.
I was just thinking, we've got 10 minutes left. How would you guys feel about moving to the closer, which we also wanted to talk about?
Yes.
The Dave Chappelle special. And also, we've only got 10 minutes, but I'm figuring maybe we can chit-chat. And if anybody wants to call and talk about what we were just talking about, Andre's alone in the studio right now, but 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. So Dave Chappelle's special, The Closer, came out recently. Super controversial because of the whole trans LGBT.
Were you able to see it?
Yes. Watched it last night. That was hilarious. You've seen it. Cordell, you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Austin, have you seen this?
No.
You haven't seen this? Oh, dude, you have to watch that.
I've been moving. I just got internet last night.
That's
okay, I just got internet.
Do you normally like Chappelle?
Yes.
It's great.
I will watch it. Is it Netflix?
Yes.
Yeah.
I will watch it.
He's sort of. I'm not pulling because he sets it up this way. It's his last Netflix special, either forever or for a while. That's like the sort of premise, The Closer. It's good. It's very good, but it's controversial.
It's very controversial. I mean,
specifically because of the trans stuff, I think that he gets into. He focuses like the last half of the show on like a combination of stories that he has with trans people, and also just like the whole backlash.
It's
ideas.
Dave Chappelle. I mean, it wouldn't be Dave Chappelle if it wasn't controversial. I mean, this is a guy since the start of his career has made a living off of being the most controversial guy on TV, in comedy, whatever. Honestly, I've seen a lot of Dave Chappelle shows, his stand-ups. I don't think The Closer was funnier than Sticks and Stones. That's just me personally. Sticks and Stones was hilarious to me.
Yeah.
But B, this is material that he uses in every stand-up.
That's what he does.
In every stand-up. I mean, if you're going to complain about this, then it would have to be literally every project Dave Chappelle has done throughout his career.
And by the way,
you have to go to.
He's equal opportunity attacker.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like he's like, okay, I'm only going to pick on gays in the trans community. No, at the point where he's going after women, calling them Bs, where he's going after blacks, calling them Ns, he's going after, it's equal opportunity. There's not, I don't get the sense that there's a malicious attack on the trans community here. That's not what I got watching that.
Well,
and real quick, Sticks and Stones, was that the one where he brings up this notion of that he was trying to understand why the trans community was attacking him or why they were upset about him or something like that? And he goes into this kind of introspective thing about
the car.
Yeah.
Was it
okay.
LBG,
yeah, because he went into this introspective thing of saying, like, at the point where people are upset about something, he wants to understand why they're upset about it. He goes into this intriguing introspection on the whole trans issue. And it's like, you hear that, and it's like, it's not like he's tone deaf. He is paying attention, but his job is of a comedian. And on some level, the fact that they push back so much against them, on some level, I would argue, even incentivizes him to push harder in the other direction. What are your thoughts, Shane?
Well, we actually have a caller.
Oh, cool.
We have a caller, so I think we should go to him. I did have a thought, but the caller's preoccupying my mind at this point. Brave, calling in from ATL. Brave, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, well, good morning, guys. What's going on? I'm so happy you guys are taking calls because I was frothing at the mouth as I was listening to the whole Kyrie Irving bit. First, concerning the Chappelle thing, I agree with you guys. It was a great show. It was not as funny as the prize for Sticks and Stones, but I think it was more because he was addressing certain things. And you're a comedian, and you're literally addressing serious things that have been leveled against you, but you're still doing it in a funny way. That dude was a genius.
Agreed.
I've heard people I've heard people covering it and looking for and saying what he should have said and how his joke should have been. I mean, that's subjective. I mean, and one is subjective, and two, it's Dave Chappelle, bro. Like he's not the leader of the people. He's a comedian, so what he is doing is above and beyond. So I agree with you guys on that.
Greatest of all time. The glory hole thing, saying he's like these new gays are brittle or something he said, and it makes this point. I like the glory hole gays, and then he goes into this thing about how jealous he is of glory hole. It's hilarious. Like he's greatest of all times. What had you frothing at the mouth on the first conversation with Stephen Smith on Kyrie Irving?
Stephen A. Smith in himself makes me froth at the mouth. I'm just saying, I have to wonder, okay, so I don't know if you guys saw the press conference that played in the media repeatedly where Kyrie was addressing it. Now, I'm not getting into the basketball side of it, right? The only thing I'll get into on the basketball side is the idea is that he's putting, and disagree, we can agree to disagree, but the idea that he's putting the rest of his teammates at risk kind of calls into question the logic behind taking the vaccine then, because if they're all vaccinated, and let me point out also that he makes the point of saying, I've already had COVID, I have antibodies, and there is science showing that the antibodies they do work. They're 13 times better or more make you more likely to not catch it, or to work better against any future infection, right? Not saying you won't be, still, right? So
some of the research came out recently that made the point of saying that your own antibodies is not the same. I mean, we don't know the level of infection. We don't know how intense the infection was, et cetera. We have no idea his clarity of clearance.
It could go back and forth. I don't know one way or the other. Just one piece of research, because I've also seen stuff saying it's more effective. I've seen stuff saying it's just as effective.
But go ahead, Barry. Make your point.
Yeah, let me say I don't want to get into a back and forth on that. But I'll just say this: the press conference that he had, the briefing that he had, his explanation on his reasons for everything that he's doing was very, very, very well explained. He, as a matter of fact, he was more informed and did a better job of informing the public in his press conference pertaining to his performance on the team as a player, right, that I've seen in any briefing from the White House, both when Trump was in and now when Biden is in, and that's crazy. And the idea that Stephen A. Smith would say, because at the core of it, you got to remember, at the core of it, and this is what I think is getting lost with the politics of everything. This is a personal health decision. You see what I'm saying? And he's being, and Stephen A. Smith is saying that he's being, irresponsible or selfish for making a personal health choice. Now, you can say that.
That is literally selfish. I mean, that is literally pertaining to self.
Right. Well, yeah. I guess so. But it's your health. So if I make a personal health decision on because he made the point, and it's a true fact. He's in his prime. He's in great shape, right? He doesn't have any comorbidities, right? So we know that there's a 98% chance of there's a 98%. Well, I don't want to get an argument, but we know that people in his physical condition have a better chance of surviving COVID, which he obviously already did because he already had COVID, right?
Yeah, the assumption he's in a pretty low risk group,
right?
Personally,
I think it was like 2% or something like that, or like 1% of the people died with COVID, and
Well, I mean, just to his point, I do agree. I found it a little cringy that the NBA media made a point this preseason to ask every NBA player about their vaccination status. I did find that a little cringy, but at the same time, to his point of saying that it's not really selfish, I think it is selfish in the sense of, he plays in a team sport, and he plays for a team that's in a state that has mandated the vaccine. He pretty much has no choice if he wants to play basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. He has no choice.
And he said he wasn't against the vaccine. He says, I'm not against the vaccinations. Isn't that a bit selfish? I mean, he's saying, I don't have any ideological issues associated with the vaccine. However, I'm just not going to take it.
It's him wanting to be the opposer.
Yeah. Brave?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because consider, now I know a lot of people are in on the mandates, right? But just consider this for me, and hear me out for a moment, right? There are a large amount of people who are not in for the mandate, not saying anti-vaccine, whatever. They're not in for the mandate because of personal choice, like my body, my choice, or the case of, hey, as the point you guys made earlier, these vaccines come out real quick. And as you see, in the beginning, I'm trying to move fast. In the beginning, we were saying, there's no information showing that there's that there are side effects or horrible side effects or deaths. But information is rolling out every day, and the reason why information is rolling out every day is because we're still in the trial phase. And so we're talking. It's not like we got years of information on this vaccine, as in the case of like polio and measles and all of that stuff, right? We don't have that. We're in the trial phase, right? So he's making a personal choice for his health, but he's also being a voice for those who are being minimized and called anti-vaxxers because they have concerns. But we're not talking about people who think that the vaccines came from lizards. We're talking about people who have valid concerns, and the more and more whistleblowers are coming out and saying things for the medical profession from these vaccine companies, these pharmaceutical companies. There are whistleblowers out saying things. There are studies out. Information has come out from beers. There's a lot of information.
We're going to have to cut this here.
Yeah, we got to close out. We're just at the end of the hour. But thank you for the call. I mean, and look, one side of this wants to paint these people like Kyrie as like a conscientious objector to vaccines, but he's playing on a team. I don't know. The other side, of course, wants to paint him as idiots. Maybe he's somewhere in between, but this seems self-serving regardless. We got to close this hour out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Brave, thank you for the call. We're coming back with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever vigilant, indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
Unless we're in another dimension somewhere, and even still then, that would mean you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
There's some sort of interdimensional transponder.
Interdimensional transponder. But see, every time I hit that, I keep thinking to myself, but it's still the same show. Like, unless it was, another person, but at that point, it's no longer Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. It's something else. So it's like you're still stuck with even an alternate reality, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Far too much thought into that, to be honest.
Well, it's a comfort to know that just based on the way we are, that in some of those other universes with other versions of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, they're talking about us too, right? They're having these same conversations, so we're in a kind of community around this stuff. It's a good thing.
It's like a blind spot, even though we're still aware.
Exactly.
All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 106,422 new cases of COVID reported, along with 1,887 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 88,612 cases per day, a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 66% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,671,658 people across the United States and has killed 719,725 men, women, and children. Look, get vaccinated. I mean, whatever you want to think, at the end of the day, yes, a vaccine may have some kind of ancillary or some kind of symptoms associated with it. But the reality of it is COVID is far worse. I mean, the thing from organ damage, from mental damage, all of those things, the question that you're really taking when you're getting the vaccinations, basically, what is going to be worse for me, catching COVID or getting the vaccine? And decisively, it's not even a contest. Getting COVID is far worse and is not this kind of thing of, I'm going to catch COVID in order to prevent myself from getting COVID. That is utterly ridiculous. It is true that the Delta variant in this case is not perfect, or the vaccination is not perfect at stopping the Delta variant, but that was never the conjecture. And more importantly, never the conjecture. It still lowers your chance of getting it, lowers your chances of transmission, lower your chances of getting ill and filling up hospitals and ERs, which has basically been taking place across the country. Be a good citizen. Second, in national news, Chicago's police union has threatened to file a temporary restraining order in an attempt to stop the city's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara is urging union members to defy the mandate. Catanzara said Chicago will have a police force of 50% or less if Mayor Lightfoot pushes staff who do not report vaccination status on leave. Very interesting. Very interesting. Basically, the cops telling people to break, well, I don't necessarily know if that's going to be a law, but at the very least, break policy. Shannon Marie O'Connor, a 47-year-old from California, is being charged with 39 criminal charges, including counts of sexual battery, child molestation, providing alcohol to minors, all for helping her son throw massive, awesome parties at her house. O'Connor would encourage her son to bring friends over, consistently provide alcohol, and encourage drinking and sexual acts, oftentimes with children unable to give consent. Remember, there is a difference between being a cool parent and throwing responsibility to the wind and getting your kids, or being a place for your kids to drink alcohol and have sex underage. Yeah, that's going to be problematic. A New York City police officer is in custody after allegedly shooting 2 women, killing one at her home in Brooklyn. The off-duty cop arrived at her girlfriend's house and discovered her with another woman. She then fired, possibly multiple times, into the stranger's chest, killing her shortly after. The unfaithful partner was shot once in the stomach and expected to survive. Yeah, you can't issue maximum justice on a cheating girlfriend. That doesn't necessarily go over all that well. The committee investigating the January 6th riot has issued a subpoena to former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, who is believed to have, quote, repeatedly attempted to use his position to overturn the 2020 election and interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, unquote. In international news, a man armed with a bow and arrow, a real-life dark Hawkeye, killed 5 people and wounded in a small Norwegian town before being arrested. The man had a confrontation with police, but has been brought into custody. Bow and arrow versus a gun. Some of the funniest times is when Hawkeye kind of breaks the fourth wall, and he's like, I'm out here with a bow and arrow. And it's like you have these super beings that are nearby.
I've never seen it. Have you ever fired one?
Huh? No, I've never. Well, no, I've tried, but I've never been able to get it right. We did it in school, and there was some other kind of like little event where you would go and have this kind of competition with other people at the go-kart park where they had arrows and stuff. But I was never good at it.
Done it a couple times.
Were you any good at it? Were you a natural at being
I
able to-
got lessons briefly, but then they turned out to be too expensive for my family at the time, so we were like, no, sorry, Shay. But it was great. I get to fire an bow and arrow a couple times. Austin, our producer, I can see he's making some noise in there. He definitely has bow and arrow.
Yeah.
True bow and arrow status.
Very cool.
I know he's done some hunting that might have something to do with it.
It's
Who knows?
practical skill set, man. Especially
cool.
if
Anyway.
there's some kind of e-impulse. It gets rid of all of the technology on the planet. Those guys are going to be the heroes of this world.
I'm
Bow
so
and arrow
glad you
people.
said EM pulse. You didn't say EMP pulse. It's like people, saying ATM machine.
Yeah.
Well, it's AT
Right,
machine.
EMP pulse,
It's,
right?
it's electromagnetic pulse. Anyway.
Geeking out. Just geeking out hour. A fire in a residential building in South Taiwan has killed 46 people and injured another 41. The building housed residents as well as restaurants, karaoke bars, and other small businesses. The government is looking into the fire to determine whether arson was to blame or not. 46 people dying. That is horrendous. In tech news, Senators Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, and Chuck Grassley, Republican, are joining forces to lead the charge to pass a bipartisan antitrust bill to hit big tech companies. The bill is specifically targeted to curb platforms promoting and favoring their products and services over others. Amazon and Alphabet's Google are on the top of that list. Facebook and Apple are also in this conversation, but the main focus right now is on Google and Amazon. And this has to do with recent reporting that came out basically unequivocally that Amazon would use products that other people would have and display their own products ahead of those other products. So if you think about it, Amazon has this massive platform that allows people to go and buy stuff. You can browse, you can do all of that stuff, but you can buy stuff. Amazon sells its own products on that platform in addition to having people sell their products. Well, does Amazon have an incentive to basically use their products first and give you that product more so than other people's products? Of course. If it's related to Amazon, they're just going to make more bang for the buck doing so. By the same token, it shafts other people who are putting their products up there. And there's a secondary question of Amazon even looking at a product saying, hey, that's a great idea for a product, and getting one of their manufacturers to make that product and then putting your product on page 5. If you don't like the way this sounds, then this is why this antitrust legislation is basically bubbling up. It looks pretty bad. In Earth and Science news, the Biden administration unveiled plans to develop large offshore wind farms along much of the United States coastline in the coming years. This is part of Biden's pledge to create 30,000 megawatts of offshore energy by 2030, an amount that can power up to 10 million homes. I applaud him on this, actually. That's a great idea. In holiday news, be bald, be free day. Bald and free. And in last, National Dessert Day. All of you diabetics out there, be careful, but eat up. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, I like this idea for the offshore wind thing. I mean, look, if climate change is real, it's either real or not. And if it is real, it is on some level existential in the way that they're talking about it. I think it was like 3.2 degrees Celsius increase expected. And that's based on just kind of this notion of one item after the next. Doesn't have anything to do with triggers that go in or these kind of loops that take place or feedback loops that push it higher. None of that stuff is pretty on the table. And the question becomes, are we going to do anything real and legit to deal with something that is supposed to be existential for the human race? Up to this point, the answer is no. And, even the Paris Accords doesn't necessarily work. There were no teeth behind it. And oftentimes, many of these guys are just talking about like, oh, we have to do something about this. But really, nothing real is done. At least nothing real is done in a way. It's almost as if they want to be able to say, we're going to keep everything exactly the way it is, but we're somehow going to deal with this issue. And I'm not sure if it works that way, especially if it's in the bricks of the way we go about our affairs. What are your thoughts on this? But this, I thought it was a good idea.
I like renewable energy broadly, but if I were to do it, I would do more geothermal, like deep geothermal wells, and I would do nuclear, frankly, because I'm more.
Yeah, you like the nuclear stuff.
I do tend to like the good nuclear stuff.
Yeah, the good nuclear stuff.
Yes,
as opposed to the bad nuclear stuff.
As opposed to the old stuff. It's not as safe.
I mean, there's a few things that I would do, honestly. I mean, food and these kind of like would take some of the dilapidated buildings across the country and converting those things into these kind of vertical gardens. I think that would be a great idea. Cut down on the cost of food. On many of these buildings, put on fauna and stuff like that, where you can cut down the temperature of the buildings just kind of naturally.
Like flora? Like,
flora. Right. What do I call it? Fauna.
I was just thinking of like deer.
Fauna is deer, right. Okay.
Animals in general, but of course.
No, good catch. You just have deer jumping off of buildings and stuff like that.
Because there are greenways. There are like these ideas of, I've seen over bridges, for instance, so that, two areas of land that are separated by a road, you can have either a bridge or a tunnel connecting greenways. That came to mind.
I mean,
that's not what you're talking about.
I think those are good ideas, personally.
For sure.
I mean, even having like greenery on top of buildings where it cuts down the temperature of the building and of itself in cities.
And here, I want to do a big old loop. I want to close a big old loop. Because a while back, we had a first-time caller. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. It was towards the end of the show, of course. And we'd been talking about the white paint. Remember the super reflective white paint they created?
You can basically reflect it more in order to get more energy from the sun.
Yeah, more reflective white paint than ever. And then he was like, he's a big fan of it. And then I'm taking the call, and he had another comment that he wanted to make. And so I was like, just briefly, like, I'm not a fan of it, but let's move on. Let's get to the other thing. Like, I disagree with you. And I do. And here's why. It's so ugly. All of the light reflecting off of the roofs blinds. I'm blinded often. Maybe I'm just a little bit photophobic or something like that. But like, a certain time of day, you're walking down the street.
It's going to be painful.
It is going to be painful with all the glass and metal in this city specifically. I like, even marble. That reflects a lot of light, but there's something matte about the light where it's not quite as shiny. I don't know. I'm just saying, definitely less blinding white light.
Maybe the issue then isn't to use basically the super white paint. It's to come up with some kind of paint that allows you to pull energy from whatever you're using. I mean, even piezoelectric meters in the ground, for example. I think Japan was using this in order to get energy for their subways.
Or trees. You just grow plants. I mean, you have photosynthesizing agents that convert the light into energy that can then be either harvested by local organisms or converted. You can literally take the trees. This gets a little bit controversial.
Also us being able to get energy from that stuff.
Well, but we could theoretically even do that. You could take the trees, cut them down, turn the wood into biofuel. It's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
But in cities specifically, if you just have treeways in the middle of cities, that reduces the incidence of light, reduces temperatures on cars, makes it so that when you come outside and get in your car, it's not 90 degrees, it's 70 or whatever.
The cities are typically higher in temperature than the surrounding area because, the buildings are basically little heat sinks.
Okay, exactly. All concentrated in there. People tend to have warmer temperatures, and then with all that stone and glass, everything's just getting reflected in there. Of course, walking around a city, it's obvious.
I guess my ultimate point, though, is a little bit more intelligent thought behind it. There are all sorts of ideas that are just there for the taking, even though it would take a bit of investment. I mean, putting piezoelectric motors into the ground, so when people walk, you're generating energy for, I don't know, lights or whatever else that you can use for it. Well, if you're talking about somewhere like New York or Vegas, that's a tremendous amount of power.
Also, this is kind of late breaking news for us, but within the last hour, a bunch of stuff has been happening in Beirut. 3 are dead in clashes. Red Cross confirmed 5 are now dead. That's the most recent. And then grenade launchers are being fired by assailants as the gun battle in the city continues. That's, of course, Beirut, Lebanon, for those listening.
I saw something about that last night, but I didn't see the entire story.
Yes.
All right, so this is Reuters. Delhi shootings, gunfire. Thank you, Reuters. Gunfire in Beirut killed at least 5 Lebanese Shiites, and what authorities said was an attack on protesters who was going to take part in a demonstration called by Hezbollah to demand the removal of the judge investigating last year's port explosion. Oh, man, we're still dealing with the port explosion aftermath.
Yeah, 14 months ago about.
Yeah, and this was that magnificent explosion that basically flattened Beirut. It was in all sorts of newspapers. The explosion in itself was astonishing. And apparently there were certain chemicals that had been on boats for like 14 months. Is the thing.
It was like ammonium nitrate?
Yeah.
Something like that? Yeah, it was ammonium nitrate, exactly. Combined with tons of fireworks. 15 tons of fireworks were in this warehouse. That's the official narrative. People were alleging that a bomb had been set off by some outside force. Anyway, blew this port up. Massive explosion, leveled that part of the city. Left the capital basically in a state of
tatters,
in tatters economically, and they'd already been going through a political crisis. And the political crisis hasn't ended since then, clearly. I mean, we've been talking about blockades and shipments of oil, dealing with Syria and Lebanon.
It just made it worse. I mean, and so even the political situation just got that much more fraught. after this. Because if I remember correctly, they were having these massive protests in Lebanon during the time. Like massive protests. But yeah, this is still going on. Here's another one. Heavy gunfights were still ongoing Thursday afternoon in the worst violence Beirut has seen in a decade. Live video on local news channels show shots being fired on buildings as residents from Al Tayahoune neighborhood continue to evacuate the area. The Lebanese military has also cordoned off the area and set up barbed wire. Live feeds from local media shows masked men with machine guns in the area with armored military vehicles deployed to the streets. The Interior Minister has confirmed that B-7 RPG anti-tank grenade launchers have been fired by assailants. 5 people are dead, up to 30 have been injured, according to the Red
So
Cross.
think about that for a second. People in the streets are firing RPG launchers at the government. Don't just laugh at that and think about how odd that would be in America. What does that mean? It means that there's some kind of uprising, civil war type thing going on, something like that, where they're trying to overthrow the government. That sounds like, and unless the government can push it down, but it sounds like that's what's happening, right?
I mean, but the idea that you have anti-tank grenade launchers held by the civilians who are basically in opposition is pretty wild. I mean, that's some pretty heavy stuff. This is not just, these guys have pop guns and they're going out shooting. This is an active, attack on the government or in some kind of way, especially if you're saying they're assailants.
Yes.
And they have heavy equipment, apparently, in order to pull this off. But let's do this. Let's take a break. We're going to have to get somebody on that story to figure out exactly what is going on here. We'll have somebody for you guys tomorrow, more likely than not.
And possibly. Well, we'll see. We have Daniel Lazar on the line. He might know something as well.
Yeah.
But regardless, we're going into our break. Coming back, we will be speaking with Daniel Lazar. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined on the line by Daniel Lazar, independent journalist and author. Daniel, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. I don't know if you heard before we went into the break, but stuff's blowing up in Beirut. Literally, it's a bad pun. There's what seems to be a civil war breaking out. Deadly shootings. Over 5 dead last I saw, up from 3 earlier this morning, our time. 6 at this point. Thank you, Austin. And RPGs being fired in the streets. Have you been following the situation? I mean, clearly the blast last year was massive. Political unrest didn't end then. But in the last couple of months, I haven't been following super closely what's been going on the ground. Just out of curiosity, we weren't planning on talking about it with you, but I know you follow this kind of thing. Have you been staying up on this one?
Yeah. I've been staying abreast. It's really an amazing story. I mean, Lebanon is an example of a country that's just been so dysfunctional for so long. That it became normal, actually. But then it finally just collapsed, completely went over the edge. And now there is simply not a government left. There's barely a society. Everything is breaking down. It's really extraordinary.
What exactly took place? I mean, they're saying, or they're tying this to the blast that took place in Lebanon over a year or so ago. What is the impetus for the conflict that's taking place now?
Well, the blast led to, first of all, the blast was caused by gross negligence. I mean, dangerous chemicals were allowed to pile up in a warehouse on the waterfront, and they eventually exploded. And of course, people knew they were piling up. They thought it was someone else's problem. It was put off until tomorrow, again and again and again, and finally the tipping point was reached and the explosion occurred. And it was a massive explosion that destroyed much of the Beirut waterfront. And since then, there was an investigation to find out, what happened, which seems pretty logical. But the problem is that in Lebanon, you have this very complicated, very rigid power-sharing agreement among dozens of political parties and religious and ethnic sects. And as a result, any investigation threatened to overturn that very delicate balance of power. And once it did, an explosion would occur, a second explosion. And so, therefore, that's what we're seeing now. Hezbollah is being blamed for the explosion. I'm not sure that some of the blame may be correct. I'm sure it's not entirely correct. I'm sure there's a lot of blame to go around. But Hezbollah feels like it's being pushed to the wall. Therefore, it's pushing back, and therefore the whole situation will just explode in civil war, causing things to go downhill all the more.
What the heck is going to come out what is going to happen? Who would side with whom in that civil war? Outside forces potentially getting involved. How do you see that working out, Dan?
It's a catastrophe. I mean, it's unpredictable because the alignments are so complicated. Usually you would think that Muslims would side with Muslims against Christians, etc. But it's never as complicated as that. And there's a great deal of backstabbing going on, and alliances take place across sectarian lines, etc. And meanwhile, of course, Syria is watching it very closely. Israel is watching it very closely. The Saudis are watching it very closely. So they will have a finger in the pie. So as things break down, there's a great danger of contagion of Israel and Syria being drawn into the conflict. I mean, after all, Hezbollah is not merely a national player; it's a regional player. With important forces in Syria, and Iran is an important regional player as well. So it's the potential to draw in all these outside parties into the vortex.
Wow, that is problematic. So you're expecting this to basically expand if it goes to the level of a civil war?
Well, I just can't see any way out of it. I mean, the system is so dysfunctional, it's so profoundly broken that just like if your toaster is broken, it's not going to repair itself, right? And if a political system is just as profoundly broken as Lebanon's is, there won't be a miracle. It won't rise from the ashes. It won't repair itself. It'll only break down into further disrepair. That's the way I see it. So I can only see, a deepening black hole drawing neighboring forces into Lebanon.
And those forces would include Islamists, who probably include ISIS fighters. I mean, 2011 to 2017, officially, you had fighters spilling over from the Syrian civil war over into Lebanese territory and fighting there on Lebanese territory. That officially ended. Although, who knows what? I don't know exactly what's been going on since then. But the idea that if the government breaks down, it's not just going to be outside national forces, it's going to be everything that comes in, right? What's your take on that?
Well, it's a black hole. I mean, it's a vacuum. And, nature abhors the vacuum, and outside forces rush in to fill it. So, those outside forces could be like, Al-Qaeda-like forces, Sunnis. It could be Hezbollah and other Shiite forces. It could be various Christian forces. It could be, certainly will be Israel, which was keeping a close eye on things. And though it could include Syria and Iran. So I mean, I just can't see how the black hole can't help but widen, and as it does, how it can't help but draw in outside forces.
We've been talking about regional forces, but what about the United States for a second? I've heard a bit about the Lebanese central bank ownership, and recently the central bank boss said that nobody was actually running the country. But I'd heard, of course, previously the central bank manager of that, basically director, governor, was effectively a lackey of the West. Like their main point man in the country was, if I remember correctly, how he was painted. What's the situation there, and how do you think that they, if they decided to intervene, what would that look like?
Well, I can't really give you an answer there. I mean, what happened is the Lebanese pound, the currency, utterly collapsed because Lebanon had been dependent on capital inflows from the Saudis and other Persian Gulf oil exporters. I mean, Lebanon was the banking capital, the gambling capital, the pleasure capital of the Middle East, and that's how they made money essentially. When oil prices collapsed in 2019, that caused the Lebanese economy to collapse because all that money stopped flowing in. Excuse me. Now, however, the situation is reversing. Oil is at $80 a barrel. It's climbing very strongly. It very possibly will go up. So therefore, I guess there's a possibility that the Saudis may use their excess cash to try to bolster the Lebanese economy. That's just pure speculation on my part. But the problem with the Saudis doing that is the Saudis then will wind up strengthening certain factions at the expense of others, which will lead to a further, imbalance, tipping point in the balance of power, which could wind up, aggravating the tendencies towards civil war.
And just so we're clear, they were in a 15-year civil war that ended in the 1990s. And after that, apparently, they pegged their lira to the dollar. So how did I'm not sure if you could even answer this. What was the thing that caused the depreciation in the currency? Was it just the entire economy at this point was a Ponzi scheme because they relied on dollars and influx of cash? Or was there something else that was taking place? I'm seeing that there was some kind of financial crisis or some kind of financial breakdown that took place recently.
Well, I think it was the collapse in oil prices. I mean, that was the great precipitous event across the Middle East. And do you remember back in, I think it was April 2019, where suddenly oil prices went into negative territory? Woke up and found that the price of oil was minus $40.
It was like a 2-day shock or something like that, almost overnight.
No one could even figure out what that even meant.
I was like, wait, should I buy some barrels of oil at negative prices and store them? And it turns out it's not a good idea to store them in a closed space. But go ahead, Daniel.
So that led to, first of all, Dubai became a ghost town for several months. That led to just extreme economic disruption across the region, and with dramatic consequences for Lebanon. Consequences on top of Lebanon's long-running political crisis, as exemplified by the harbor explosion. So therefore, this seems to have sort of just yanked the rug out from under the Lebanese economy and out from under Lebanon in general. So we see a truly a failed state on a really massive scale.
Wow. How do you think this resolves? And for that matter, I guess this is two questions. How does this resolve? Does this just develop into this kind of civil war because there doesn't seem to be any breaks on fixing it, nor does we've had a guest on who made something of a similar point, talking about the way that the political system had been structured, that it's almost impossible for it to repair itself. It's basically this kind of sectarian system where certain groups are basically allowed in the government itself, but it's not this thing where you vote for the person that you want. And tell me if I'm wrong in explaining this. This was a while ago where we had the person on. But their basic point was it creates a fractious political situation that makes it difficult to get anything done and basically keeps them in this kind of political intransigence. So from your standpoint, one, how would this get fixed? If there was a magic wand or something to the effect that somebody can wave over Lebanon, what would it take to kind of fix the situation? And I guess contrary to that, what is going to take place within the next month or so? Is there any faction that seemed to be pulling the brakes on what seems to be a devolving situation in Lebanon?
Oh, first of all, not all problems are fixable. That's the important thing. You just often can't wave a magic wand and cause things to get better. Basically, in a nutshell, Lebanon is a highly it was once part of Syria. It's a highly fragmented polity in which multiple confessional lines, and in other words, multiple religious lines, and a multitude of different Christian factions and Muslim factions and Druze and other groups as well. Now, in order to keep the peace, the French then essentially, who were the former colonial masters, essentially worked out a very complicated power-sharing arrangement. And that worked well, except that one thing we've seen is that we've seen tremendous population growth among the Muslim community, especially the Shiite community. So therefore, they feel that they are the losers in this power-sharing arrangement because they don't have their representation is not equal to their true numbers. So that is kind of the basic source of instability over the years. And how to fix it? Well, I guess the way to, they haven't had a national census in decades because they're afraid of what their census will tell them, which is that, the representation system is out of date and needs to be rejiggered, brought into alignment with the real size of the various communities, et cetera. So if you wanted to wave a magic wand, I guess we'd do is we would privatize religion, secularize the state, have one person, one vote, and all these things. But that's very easy to say and very difficult to accomplish. So therefore, given the difficulty, I just don't see any immediate prospect of that happening. I just see the contrary. I see things going, further and further downhill. So I'm very pessimistic in the short to medium term.
It doesn't seem like a good situation, though. So a particularly good attitude doesn't seem warranted. Although, optimism, maybe it can hurt sometimes. I'm going to close this segment out. We're going to be coming back, changing topics. Daniel Lazar, thank you for joining us. It was great talking about this. Clearly not what we were anticipating, but you did a great job, as always. We're joined on the line by Daniel Lazar. We'll be back with him in a minute. He's a journalist and author. When we come back, I'll tell you where you can find his books, his writing. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Daniel Lazar, independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Follow Daniel on Twitter at DHLazare, that's Lazare, and find his column on theweeklyworker.co.uk, strategic-culture.org, and many other websites and outlets. Daniel, thank you again for sticking with us. I'm going to change now to national politics here in the States. I want to talk for a minute. We're talking about the bills and stuff, the negotiation, of course, the debt ceiling postponed until December, that whole conversation. We were talking about that yesterday. But briefly, today, January 6th, there's going to be this panel, and Steve Bannon is on the line for criminal charges if he doesn't show up to this. Basically, Steve Bannon, former Trump campaign chair back in 2016, taking over after Paul Manafort was ousted or quit or whatever. Anyway, Steve Bannon, campaign chair of Trump's campaign, supposed to show up. Have you been following this, Daniel?
Sure, of course. I mean, the Democrats are carrying out the war that began on January 6th. They're trying to gain advantage, but they're losing overall, I think.
Well, what do you mean? Why do you think they're losing overall? Well, and I guess two questions. Do you believe, whether you believe something or anything nefarious was going on or not, it did seem that Trump was pushing many of the people that was in a circle to do something or to try to go beyond, let's say, their powers in creating conflict in the transition of power between Biden and Trump.
If I remember correctly, Daniel agrees. I think, Dan, you're on the same side as Jamarl on this one.
Yeah, and so that's what I was going to the second question. Is there a reality to it then? If indeed that the brain trust was looking for ways to kind of undercut or undermine the election itself, doesn't it follow that there should be an investigation into what that brain trust was potentially doing? Or do you disagree?
I think an investigation. I mean, I'm all in favor of investigations. I mean, the more we know, and the better we know. So investigations are a good thing. But the reason I think that the Democrats are losing this war is that I think that Trump, it was a genuine attempted coup, but it was a really half-assed attempted coup. It was spur of the moment. Trump didn't really have much to go on. It was clear that Biden had won. Any legal challenges to the vote really had buttered out. So therefore, Trump's efforts to block the final, congressional ratification of the vote really were kind of doomed to failure, which is why, we had the insurrection, but the insurrection was just, kind of, again, doomed to failure. But I think what we've seen since then is a major Republican Party push to strengthen their hand in the event of similar battles in 2022 and especially 2024. And essentially, the goal is to make a second coup d'état, which will be much more effective, much harder to resist. I mean, I think that 2020 may conceivably have been the last free election America will ever see.
That's a big claim. And here's the thing: is some would argue that American elections haven't been free. There's a gradient here. There are shades of gray of what free exactly means, because clearly there have been problems, deep problems. Even if you forget about tampering with votes or vote counting or anything like that, the media, the propaganda. This is the point that I keep making. In 2016 to 2020, if it's the fourth estate, the way that it was covering this stuff was crazy. The way they were covering Trump, the way they were covering Russiagate, the way they were pushing that. I mean, the way in the most recent election with the Hunter Biden emails, the Hunter Biden laptop, and that not getting majorly covered and talked about in the debates in the way that it should have.
And hidden.
It got hidden. You couldn't talk about it on Twitter. So that's almost an aside. My point is again, kind of as an aside, our elections have been screwed up for the last couple of cycles too. I'm not even going to say the 2020, but also you're making some big claims there, of course, Daniel, is saying this is the last true election we're going to have, and that Republicans, they're gaining power so that next time around they can use it for a coup. And you don't just mean at the ballot box. You mean a real coup, either a military one or something else like this, where they overdo, upturn the Constitution just to take what they want. Why do you think that's going to happen?
I mean, first of all, I agree with you totally. I mean, the electoral process in the U.S. is a shambles. It should, we don't have one election. We have 50 state elections. Or in fact, we actually have 10,000 separate elections, because each local electoral district in this country is more or less autonomous. And, and most of the time it works. Occasionally it doesn't. There are giant snafus. So the whole thing just fairly cries out for a rational overhaul from top to bottom. That's what any normal country would do. But what the Republicans are doing is that with these vigilante-style laws where they're empowering poll watchers to essentially disrupt the proceedings and challenge the votes as they're occurring, what they're attempting to do is to create the basis for litigating any electoral results. And if they can litigate the results in a dozen states, say as of starting in November 2024, and can tie up those results in the court, for the ensuing 3 months. What that means is that when it comes time in early January 2025, for Congress to certify the results, they will find that some number of states are still in play, potentially enough states to affect the electoral vote outcome. And if that happens, then Republicans can force the final decision into the House, where, as you know, voting takes place state by state, and Republicans enjoy a majority in terms of state delegations. So therefore, if Biden or Kamala Harris, essentially is running in 2024, and they seem to be on the path to get a majority of electoral votes. If the Republicans can challenge enough of those votes and tie things up and screw things up and throw it into the House, then then they win the game.
Yeah, because basically there's all sorts of little political maneuvers or legal maneuvers that go into choosing a president, even though under normal circumstances, the person gives the concession speech and you have all of this stuff that basically just happens automatically that we don't typically see. But, just like the Mike Pence thing where Trump was trying to get Mike Pence to screw around with, the transfer of power. Well, if Pence would have went along with that, despite the fact Pence would have had legal authority to do such a thing, how long would it have taken the courts to work out the fact that Pence didn't have that power, and what would take place in the meantime with all sorts of other political actors getting involved and giving their take that, no, this is perfectly fine, Pence totally has his power, or whatever else. It creates so much chaos just in the whole electoral process that you give this kind of chance for the other person to take power through these kind of legalistic maneuvering. What do you think happens after that? Because my thought was, well, this is a path to civil war. That in the same way that Trump is trying to basically steal the election, well, the other part that doesn't accept him as president, well, one or two things needs to happen. Either the military gets involved where they choose their sides, the police department gets involved where they start to choose their sides, and the public gets involved where they start to choose their sides. Or is that too hyperbolic for the situation? Do you think the public just accepts that situation? I don't think they will.
No, it won't. It's like to get back to our previous discussion. If you want to ask what the future looks like, it looks like Lebanon.
Yeah.
If Trump, if this is clearly what the Republicans are aiming for. Pence had nothing to work with in 2020. That's why he wouldn't go along with it. It would have been just way too brazen, way too out there. But in 2024, they may have more to work with. They may have a half dozen or a dozen states in which the outcomes are tied up in litigation.
Well, they send their own electors.
Pardon me?
They send their own electors, basically. As opposed to sending the electors that actually won for the president or for Biden or whoever wins that, they basically creates enough conflict and litigation where they basically send their own electors to put in whoever, even if that person didn't necessarily win. That's one of the fears, correct?
Yes, and if that happens, and if they're able to screw things up and create enough chaos, the goal is to throw it into the House, where the Republicans enjoy a built-in majority, built-in advantage. And if that happens, then the Republican becomes president.
But isn't this a pretty bad faith take, not just on Republicans, but all of the poll watchers? You're talking about a bunch of random people, I presume, who would be fairly grassroots most of the time, maybe Republicans in some cases, probably Democrats and others, not getting into tit for tat with how should the Democrats respond to this, but isn't the assumption here kind of misbased potentially that all these people are going to try to throw it for the Republicans? Well, you're just talking about people there. Why do you think that they would do that?
I think Republicans will throw their activists into the battle as poll watchers.
But we were just talking about how our elections are dirty. Again, maybe these people is the assumption these people are going to go in and they're going to be told, okay, make stuff up. I want you to accuse people of stuff. If you don't see anything, still say something. Is that the assumption?
No, I assume they'll say like the Democrats are trying to cheat. Mm-hmm. Therefore, scrutinize everything carefully. If you see anything that seems a bit off, raise a ruckus, demand a complete halt of proceedings, call the lawyers, demand an injunction, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's what I think they're aiming to do.
And on some level, that happened in 2020 with 30 million people who believe that Joe Biden is not the president of the United States. How would those people have regarded that stuff? The poll watching thing is creepy in and of itself. But look, I want to, before we let you go, I want to jump into the debt ceiling thing, because there's something that's going on with the debt ceiling that for me, I'm scratching my head on because I'm not seeing too many people talk about it, but it seems to be a big deal, and it seems to be somewhat intractable in regards to a way out. So there was this huge thing about the debt ceiling being hit in October. And so McConnell, you read the newspaper, they're like, McConnell tips his hand or McConnell gives in. And I kept saying McConnell hasn't given in to anything. Under normal circumstances, what they were supposed to do or what they were being told to do is use budget reconciliation as a way to pass the debt ceiling, that the Republicans were going to filibuster it. So there was no way to get through on the normal legal challenges or normal legal process. And so the reconciliation, where they were going to basically use the 51 party line vote in order to pass it, was the way that they were talking about doing it. All right, fast forward to McConnell saying, okay, fair enough. I'm going to let this go through for 2 months. Now, the Democratic Party, if they're going to pass their budget reconciliation bill and they get the other infrastructure bill, it's going to have to be this month. They've set a deadline, I believe, October 31st, as when that has to go through. But October 31st is in October, and the debt ceiling thing is now in December. And so unless they're going to have this kind of third bite at the apple for budget reconciliation, which I have a hard time believing they are, and the Republicans continue to basically say we're going to filibuster, when McConnell said we're not going to help you at all to pass the debt ceiling, then the question is, how does the Democratic Party pass the debt ceiling? They can't do it entirely by themselves. Reconciliation is off the table. The notion of a $20 trillion coin doesn't necessarily seem to be something they're all that enthused about. So it seems that McConnell, in giving up this kind of, I don't know, this gimmick in October, has basically strengthened his hand in December for an economic catastrophe. What am I missing here? Am I missing something in regards to other avenues that Democrats have in trying to get the debt ceiling passed?
No, you aren't missing anything. I mean, everything is in place for a perfect head-on train crash. The only thing that gives me pause is that this is the United States we're talking about. This is the world, the supreme economic power. The dollar is a reserve currency. U.S. debts or creditworthiness is sacrosanct, and I can't imagine the U.S. will sacrifice that.
But see, that's the rub. In the same way you're talking about the presidency back with Trump, where, okay, this was uncontrolled and everything else, but these guys have now got it into their heads of using the various states and the mechanisms within those states to try to undermine the government if they lose that election. Well, isn't this the same thing? Mitch McConnell starts off with Obama and is entirely against this. But it soaks in their head for a bit. You have a particular constituency within the Republican Party that is totally okay with going over the edge, just like you had a constituency back then that was totally okay with going over the edge. It seems that McConnell is serious about this. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. I totally get your point that that the full faith and credit of the United States is like part of law. By the same token, you have a party that seems to not be willing to pass the debt ceiling. And they have every capability in the world at this point, especially with reconciliation off the table, to basically enact that particular agenda.
I agree with you totally. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a gigantic train wreck could be in the works. You just don't know. They're playing Russian roulette, and we'll see what happens. I can't, on one hand, I can't believe that the Republicans will sacrifice U.S. creditworthiness in that manner. On the other hand, you're correct. American government is breaking down at an alarming rate, and it just might happen. So I can't, I'm as much in the dark as you are. It's going to be a fascinating process to see how it takes place.
Close this out. Daniel, thank you for joining us. Great talking with you this morning.
Thank you.
And for those listening, Daniel Lazar, just joining us, independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Follow him on Twitter at DHLazare, that's Lazare, and find his column on theweeklyworker.co.uk, strategic-culture.org, and many other outlets. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Got a few on the line, but room for more. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Lines.
And we're back, and we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We've got a few callers in the line. Before we get to them, just very briefly, coming back to the Dave Chappelle thing. We were talking earlier about the Dave Chappelle, The Closer, his most recent Netflix special. Pretty much everybody who'd seen it was like, yeah, it was a good special. It wasn't a very interesting conversation, frankly. We were all like, yeah, I like it. Everybody basically agreed, exactly. But one more thing that came to mind a little bit later, and it's also kind of obvious, but I feel like it's maybe even therefore worth pointing out. Dave clearly saw this response coming, saw the backlash, the massive amounts of backlash, and it proves his point, and he knew it would prove his point, which is a lot of these people are brittle, they're over-responsive, they're overreactive, they don't have common sense when it comes to these things, and I've got more to say about that, but I just wanted to throw that in there. I mean, it seems, if for anybody who watches it, it's all about, he goes into it like setting people up. This is going to be a rough one, folks. I'm going to get into some stuff here. And then he does. And what he's getting into is people overreacting and not actually listening to what he's saying or trying to figure out, gauge who he is, but just overreacting to sound bites and clips of his and stuff. And that's exactly what they did. And he knew they'd do it. And that's why he's taken a couple steps back for a while. But he did it. He stood up.
Screaming he's transphobic.
Yeah, and
all that stuff. I hate it when people do that.
I don't agree with everything he says, but who the hell am I to expect everybody to agree with what I think?
Exactly.
That's the other side of this.
Yeah.
That's hubris and arrogance and, frankly, controlling and weird.
And then taking it to another step and acting as if that is equivalent to violence. That's the other thing that's been taking place, where they're like, oh, that's equivalent to violence, or this is somehow leading to violence, et cetera. It's like, no, it's not. And you don't necessarily have to take that secondary step just because you dislike something to immediately attribute it to violence. Like when we're having these conversations about, let's say, Chinese in the country, and talking about how both parties and the people within both of those parties have basically, there's been a certain resentment that's been gaining based on jobs, where there's like, oh, they're taking our jobs based on COVID, et cetera. You can kind of see how 20-something years of steeped animosity, even going so far as to say genocide, maybe lead to a headspace where that stuff is permitted. This is a comedy act of a closer that is in no way violent or anything else. It is funny. It's all outdoors. And I don't necessarily get this thing of feeling of mean-spiritedness built into it.
I want to get back to it because I feel like I do kind of understand this. Yeah. But we got a bunch of callers in the line. I want to make sure because I pitched it to him. Let's go first to Tarif calling in from New Orleans talking about Assange. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, gentlemen. First, I'd like to say, free Julian Assange, free Dang Zinger.
You got it. That's perfect. I'm sorry to be the judge here, but you got a 3.
Okay. I had to separate the name. But anyway, they have Caitlin Johnston, man. Y'all need to have
Caitlin Johnston?
Caitlin, yeah. I've invited her.
Yeah. Yes. She just came out with an article that Netflix has come out with a re-release of a film that came out in 2013 smearing Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Mm-hmm. They steal secrets, but that's not true. And how the hatchet job done by the film director trying to put things together, trying to implicate Julian Assange or, WikiLeaks as people stealing secrets. And it's going to be coming out, 3 days before the trial itself. And it's crazy that Netflix would give good deals to the royal family and other rich people like the Obamas and other rich people, but they was basically, punched down on the working class man and woman. You know what I'm saying? And 3 days before the trial, this hatchet, and it's going to be dedicated to the American audience, straight to the U.S. audience. That is going to be released here. So it is not a good film, and it's a smear job against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, one of the best journalists ever, I think. So
it's by Alex Gibney. Yeah, the title of this, you're talking about We Steal Secrets, the story of WikiLeaks. I'm seeing it on Netflix. Alex Gibney, whose name rings a bell for me, and I can't figure out exactly why. I'm looking through the filmography, and it's like he did Citizen K, which came out recently, about Mikhail Khodorkovsky, kind of a puff piece on him as far as I know. So that might be what's sticking out. But Tarif, thanks for the heads up on that. I hadn't heard about that.
Time, gentlemen.
Appreciate it, man. All right, Tarif, thank you for the call. We have other callers. Let's go now to David calling in from NYC. David, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. About the debt ceiling, Mitch McConnell, it's a bluff. It's clearly a bluff. He can say what he wants, but when it gets close to the brink, okay, all Biden has to do is go on the air and explain to the American public that if McConnell refuses to allow the debt ceiling to be renewed, the American economy will be destroyed, and that will hurt the average American. And there's no way that McConnell. I don't think the president has to compromise anything on this. He simply can let the American public outcry against what Mitch McConnell is threatening to do work itself out.
From your mouth to God's ears. By the same token, does Mitch McConnell fully believe that he and him alone is going to take the blame for it, or the Republican Party is going to take the blame for it? I mean, that's the catch.
He's going to try to get people to blame Biden on the other side too. Why didn't you guys get anything done?
He was like, he had the presidency, he had the House,
you're pushing for this big bill. You're trying to get everything out of us. Yep. You don't have nearly as big of a majority as you. He wouldn't say this, but you're trying to get everything out of us. You're trying to get us all to come all over to your side. You're not negotiating. You're not talking to us. You just want us to do what you want us to do, and that's all. You're not, and that's not politics. Right. And that's what he can say.
They're going to conflate. Right. They're going to conflate this notion of Biden's bill going forward, and he's going to point out Joe Biden basically said, I didn't want anything to do with the Republicans' agenda, which is why he voted against the debt ceiling when he was in Congress himself. So, I agree with you that it would be dramatic and catastrophe. And even this notion of the world's reserve currency, all of that stuff, I think, is put on notice the moment that something like this happens, where the full faith and credit of the U.S. Government is basically being destroyed or undermined. But I am not entirely confident. I mean, the American public is taking weird positions on stuff. The Soleimani, they didn't even know who he was. And more than half said, yeah, it was a perfect kill or good kill. Even the Taiwan issue, whether you have the American public basically saying, yeah, it's okay for us to basically lose potentially millions of Americans in order to defend Taiwan. I mean, the American public takes very weird positions on some of this stuff, and it's not necessarily the position that is correct in a logical standpoint, but that may not necessarily matter for the politics of it. And so you may have the public saying, yeah, that's right, we need to stop spending all of this money and the debt ceiling is too high. You could even get that.
But isn't there's also something, like I'm sure there's in the Republicans too, that just bite the pill. Is what Tarif was saying, just bite the bullet.
Just bite the bullet.
Just bite the bullet. And there's something in me that's like, that kind of wants that. And the main reason, I'm going to be honest here, it's not out of any asceticism on a national level. It's not because I want anybody. It's because of our foreign policy. I feel like the main thing that locks our foreign policy into place is that we need to prop up our currency.
Yes.
We need to prop up this whole system. And if that one column falls away, then we no longer need to do that.
Well,
there's no longer this pressing incentive.
$1 trillion a year military,
and you can't afford it.
Where you're no longer the reserve currency.
So you need to, and then you suddenly get back into manufacturing. You get back into other things. But it could also go all horribly. We could go authoritarian, or there's different ways that plays out, or get invaded. Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, but it could get bad. Exactly. I mean, it's unpredictable on some level on what that looks like on the other side of it. I mean,
I'm just saying psychologically that's in the boxing ring too. You know?
Exactly. And meaning people aren't insane, but thinking that way, saying we're $24 trillion, $27 trillion in debt. They're using this money to pay for the elites. The rich are basically skimming this money off of the top. I'm sick of the way all of that stuff comes to fruition.
Yep.
And by the way, not wrong.
Yep.
That's not wrong. Even though, the conclusion may be awry, but the impetus for it's not necessarily wrong. Thank you, man. I appreciate your call. Let's go to the next caller. We have, what is it? We did David and that's everybody. Okay, good.
Let's close it out. David, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. We're going to close this hour out, of course. We're coming back in a minute with headlines and the last hour this morning. Jamarl, that's the thing. Psychologically, a lot of people, that's in the back of their mind. For anybody who knows about this stuff a little bit, it's not like there's one side to this issue, but it's clear with us being a reserve currency and with us, the currency military complex thing that's going on, wanting to shift back and pivot to American priorities and not just go full insular. Wherever you land on that spectrum, you'd need to make that kind of major shift. Now, how it happens, when it happens, whether it happens, those are still all questions.
Drastic and so forth. But those are the things that are going to be floating in people's heads when this come up of like, we need to pass it in December, we need to pass it in December. All that stuff is going to be on the table.
Yes.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas, Stranahan, back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, I'll get out of my auction voice. I do the, it's like a little roller coaster where you do the intro because it's the same words every time. And so you just go on a little ride. They speak really quickly, but it's exhausting. Well, anyway, let's get back into headlines. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern, folks. It's October 14th, about halfway through the month of October, most of the way, of course, through this year. And we've got time for COVID news again. Deaths are still high. But to give you the stats specifically, yesterday in the United States, there were 106,422 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,887 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 88,612 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. 66% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,671,658 people across the United States. And in America, it's killed 719,725 people. Chicago's police union is threatening to file a temporary restraining order in an attempt to stop the city's COVID-19 vaccination mandate. Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara is urging union members to defy their mandate. Catanzara said Chicago will have a police force of 50% or less if Mayor Lori Lightfoot places staff who don't report vaccination status on leave. In national news, Shannon Marie O'Connor, a 47-year-old from California, is being charged with 39 criminal charges, including counts of sexual battery, child molestation, and providing alcohol to minors, all for helping her son throw parties at their house. O'Connor would encourage her son to bring friends over, consistently provide alcohol, and encourage drinking and sexual acts, oftentimes with children unable to give consent because they're drunk. Is the assumption there, right? Remember,
young.
Young.
Because they're like 14.
Of course, but I'm just saying, the point is what you would stress
on
that.
A few levels, yeah.
Yeah. Remember, there is a difference between, quote, being the cool parent, end quote, and throwing responsibility to the wind, 3 sheets to the wind specifically.
I've heard people make the argument, it's like, I would rather my kid be doing alcohol here under my eyes as opposed to being elsewhere. But I don't know if the cops are going to run with that.
I don't know if the cops, and there's also a separate thing from that to like throwing ragers and getting people like, hey, take that room, go hang out in there, guys, or whatever. You know what I mean? There's like a line between those two things. But also, you're right, and this is a conversation. I grew up, and I know some parents who are natural parents, pretty strict about this stuff. Other parents were like, you get to be 17, 18 years old, and they're like, okay, whatever, if you want a beer, there's beer. They would drink occasionally later on in the day. And then there are some truly dysfunctional parents. But like everything, the law only has so much intrusion into our homes, thankfully, even though there are problems with so many homes, in my opinion, but still thankfully. But I don't know, man. This is going overboard.
It sounds a little overboard, right? If you're telling, and again, it depends on how old they are. If we're talking about 16 to 17-year-olds, I'm less bothered by that. And I do think that argument a little, because if it's like, okay, these kids are going to do this regardless, then it's a secondary thing of like, okay, do I want them under my eyesight when they're doing this? But if you're talking about like 13 and 14-year-olds, and you're basically saying, okay, you can go have sex in this room, and this room is open for, and you know that, as a parent, I think it's very dicey.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very dicey.
Austin, I don't completely understand your comment, but he is bringing up the point. If these kids are having sex with each other and they're under 18, I don't think that's illegal, right? They would,
I don't know.
In terms of consent, that's where I'm bringing it back. And I think that's where the alcohol comes in. The fact that they would be drinking, I don't know. It's not specifically alleging that they're doing a bunch of other drugs, which is good, because that would make that situation a lot worse, of course. But
what about the parents' culpability in allowing younger kids to have sex like that?
And it's kind of weird.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little dicey.
It's almost like, wait, why are you letting that? Do you like this in some way?
Why are you facilitating
Is this something about you, not about just being a cool person, but is this something that you're to get?
Because they're charging sexual assault. I mean, in some of these cases, it's like, whoa, what do you mean sexual assault?
But here's the thing, I want to keep going with headlines.
Go for it. Go.
Because we still got a bunch. In national news, a New York City police officer is in custody after allegedly shooting 2 women, killing one at her home in Brooklyn. The off-duty cop arrived at her girlfriend's house and discovered her with another woman. She then fired possibly multiple times into the stranger's chest, killing her shortly after. The unfaithful partner was shot once in the stomach and is expected to survive. The committee investigating the January 6th riot has issued a subpoena to former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, who is believed to have, quote, repeatedly attempted to use his position to overturn the 2020 election and interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, end quote. In international news, a man armed with a bow and arrow killed 5 people and wounded 2 in a small Norwegian town before being arrested yesterday. The man had a confrontation with the police, but has been brought into custody. Also, Norway's new prime minister is organizing his government the day after that incident happened. A fire in a residential building in South Taiwan has killed 46 people and injured another 41. The building housed residents as well as restaurants, karaoke bars, and other small businesses. The government is looking into the fire to determine whether arson was to blame or not. We were talking about this last hour. Fighting in Beirut, Lebanon, is erupting right now as part of what could possibly be the start of a civil war. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati moved to the headquarters of the Ministry of Defense to monitor the situation. Gunfire and rocket-propelled grenades have been flying in the streets of the city, and this, as we say, is ongoing. As of this morning, 9:06 a.m. Eastern Time, fighting has, however, temporarily halted. Minimal traffic has returned to the roadways. So far, the absolute death count is 6 people. China and Russia are holding joint naval drills off the Russian Far East as the relationship between the two countries seems to deepen. The exercises, named Joint Sea 2021, began today with a ceremony and will conclude on Sunday. China stated that the operations will, quote, encompass communications, anti-mine, anti-air, and anti-submarine operations, joint maneuvering, and firing on seaborne targets, end quote. You know,
about this.
What'd you say?
I'm totally right about this. Like, we've had...
Yes, exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. We've had him on, and he's like, well, but he, you know...
There's a strategic partnership, and I'm like, dude, if there is a war...
It's an alliance.
It's an alliance.
But there's also strategic ambiguity. Yes. It's on both sides, right? Everybody's sort of benefiting from that right now, you know, to some extent, although they're a bit clearer, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It just seems to get deeper and deeper and deeper. Because honestly, if you have a situation where you have these two countries that are so closely aligned on issues of space, on issues of military, et cetera, and you have a superpower that hegemonic control of the world in a certain degree, putting pressure on both of you. I mean, they're basically saying China's committing genocide, and they basically say Russia destroyed the election, and et cetera, et cetera. And you have one of those countries take an L. The other one is just left to its own devices. It just seems untenable to have that country leave their own devices, and it seems more advantageous to basically support the other country, even in a larger conflict. I could be wrong, but, you know, it's just kind of chess logic on some of this stuff.
Yeah. Let's keep going. In tech news, Senators Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat, and Chuck Grassley, a Republican, are leading the charge to pass a bipartisan antitrust bill to hit big tech companies. The bill is specifically targeted to curb platforms promoting and favoring their products and services over other sources. Amazon and Alphabet's Google are on the top of this list. Facebook and Apple are also in the conversation, but the main focus right now is on Google and Amazon. Chuck Grassley and Amy Klobuchar. Interesting mix-up. There you go. Kind of makes sense. I know she's been active on this stuff. Chuck Grassley has too. He's also super old in terms of people in Congress. In Earth and Science news, the Biden administration unveiled plans to develop large offshore wind farms along much of the U.S. coastline in the coming years. This is part of Biden's pledge to create 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030. That's an amount that can power up to 10 million homes. And in holiday news today, it is Be Bald and Be Free Day. It is World Sight Day, and it is World Standards Day. Got some standards there. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those are our headlines. Austin, I see you sending this link relating to the conversation we were having earlier. Could you summarize that for me, please? I'm just sorry. I appreciate it. Or, exactly, comment. Because we were having this conversation about this mom who was hosting parties for, like, teenage kids in the neighborhood and is now facing, like, statutory rape laws and battery charges, and what are the other charges? She's facing like dozens of different charges, 39 criminal charges, including counts of sexual battery, child molestation, providing alcohol to minors, all for helping her son throw parties at their house. The catch,
right? I mean, if a 13-year-old has sex with a 13-year-old, okay, is that against the law? And who is it against the law for?
That is very young.
But who is it against the law for if both of them are 13?
Either of them are culpable to statutory rape laws.
So the moment that you bring in the parents, then at that point, it's like, so wait, you're allowing those kids to break the law by having sex in this particular room or that particular room. Meaning, even if you aren't visually watching it, you know it is taking place in your house in addition to the alcohol in it. So that's where the sexual charges are coming into play.
Some of them. I mean,
Unless
you
the mom
have
touched
like
somebody.
statutory rape charges, which is pretty much just an age issue.
Yeah.
And then you have like the actual sexual assault charges, which are coming because these kids can't give consent.
Right.
And it's not just the age issue. It's also like they're affected by alcohol or other influences.
And these are so these are 14 to 16-year-old, like her son.
Yeah, that's a problem.
14 in the 14 to 16 range. So it's not like preteen, which is absolutely effing crazy insane. 13 is, of course, like Austin said, still pretty insane. 14 still young, 15 still young. 16, you're starting to get into the range 16, 17, 18, where it's like, okay, you're not an adult yet.
Yeah, I
don't know the laws on
be
that.
more passing on the 16.
Yeah, you guys are mostly asking the question. I was wondering it too in our chat there that like if two kids are under the age of consent, 18, and they engage in sexual activity, is that rape or are they culpable under the law? The answer in brief is yes, they both are. They can both basically sue each other. As the general rule, as the general federal rule, most states are like, that's ridiculous. And they've passed so-called Romeo and Juliet laws, which basically protects them as long as you're within 3 years of each other, which also makes the difference of if you're 17 and someone just turned 18. Like, so that protects you within 3 years of each other. It's consensual, then statutory rape doesn't apply. But so far, what I've seen is that's only protected to 16.
Yes, 14
Anything
years
younger,
old is very young.
15, that's not the case as well.
Yeah. 14 is very, very young.
Yeah, 14, 15, 16 is like in that weird range where they're out of puberty or whatever. They're going through it really, but they're like not a kid anymore, and they're like turning into a teenager and who wants to explore. And you can think of the major difference between like a 15-year-old who's in that space and like going over like a 17-year-old going into one of these parties.
Also keep in mind the majority of girls at that point would have been developed, and the majority of guys at that point are going to have their voice kind of like they're going to be right in the middle of puberty. So I don't know if that's good for them to engage in that young.
But basically, this mom is in trouble. I mean, like, I know when I was in school, you had people talking about sex at 14, 15, whatever, but that wasn't sanctioned by a parent per se. That was kind of these guys in the shadows exploring and having fun and just kind of messing around. I do think there's a difference between 17-year-olds kind of getting together doing this, where these guys could be at college or something like that, where you may have these parties and whatnot. And I can, on some level, justify a mom saying, look, they're 17. They're going to be doing this anyway. I would rather them do it here. 14, no, I can't get your pass on that. That's far too young for this, especially if you know they have alcohol and if you know they're engaging in sexual relations on the, there's like a dad perspective, maybe go get him, kid, or like go get him, son, that type of stuff. Even though you wouldn't tell your kid that, you're still like, that's my boy.
So as a question, is there any scenario, any case to where you feel sympathy or maybe it justifies it a little bit more for the mom?
Not for 14 years old, no.
Say, let me just throw something out there. Like, first off, I want to detach the sexual part because I think we can all determine that is a definitively bad thing. I think we could all still say it's still a problem if your kid's bringing boys over or people over and you come back with a case of booze. You're like, here you go, guys.
Yeah.
So what if like the parent is, and I get what she's trying to do. She's trying to be the cool parent. That's why I included that in the headline. Like she's trying to let them have the freedom because then you're more buddy-buddy with your parent and they're not seen as like a strict, angry type of person. So what if like the parents are divorced and the mom is just trying to really make sure that her kid connects with her more, otherwise she's scared of losing him forever, whatever. Like at what point is this like, oh, she just took it too far?
But is she still allowing sex and alcohol in this scenario?
Alcohol, yes.
That's the sex is the thing is she might not have known about that. There's ways that I can paint this story.
She pretty much encouraged it. She was like, why don't you guys play like spin the bottle or why don't you play like strip poker as 14-year-olds?
That's weird.
So even if you take the sex out, the alcohol thing is problematic at 14.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like this is the pot thing, right? It's like, okay, well, pot affects developing brains. And so all things being equal, I wouldn't necessarily want my kid messing with pot until they're older. Well, alcohol, it's not great for kids. It's not, it's like the 21-year-old thing, and you can quibble whether they should be 21 or 18, but 14 is extremely young for that.
This is a bad judgment call in any universe. It's just shades of like, okay, what level of moral damnation is this person guilty of or whatever for doing this kind of thing? Because it starts to feel like not just like a bad judgment call, but like there's something deeply screwed up. Like, again, I will go to that level because it's also what kind of comes to mind to me. Like, are you getting off on this? Is this your thing? And I don't know... But there are like shades of that where like I start to wonder that like, why are you doing this with these kids? It's just
what was
weird.
Her excuse for this? What was her justification?
There was no good justification. It was just like, I just wanted my kid to have a good time. It's
Yeah.
It hasn't gone to trial yet.
Well, there we go. Let's close this out. Austin, thank you for coming in to fill in some of the facts there. I do appreciate it. You guys have been listening to Headlines on Fault Lines. Coming back, we will be speaking with Margaret Kimberly over at the Black Agenda Report. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We did a segment, I believe it was maybe last week, where we were talking about Biden's depreciating polling numbers among independents, meaning basically a collapse on some level of the president from the time he was elected to basically now. Well, the same thing seems to be happening in demographics of Democrats, or key demographics or key constituencies of Democrats, blacks, Hispanic, and of course, the young. In Georgia, Biden told basically the Georgian population, the power is literally in your hands. You can break the gridlock that has gripped Washington and this nation. With their votes in the Senate, we'll be able to make progress. We need to make on jobs, on healthcare, on justice, on environment, and on so many things. And the reality of it is, when you look up this kind of benefit of the doubt that you might have given Joe Biden because he's not Donald Trump, at some point wears thin. And on one issue after the next, it seemed he basically just failed. Whether it was the voting legislation that was supposed to take place, the policing legislation that was supposed to take place after George Floyd, the $15 an hour minimum wage that was supposed to take place. All of those things were things that Biden had put on the agenda. All of those things are things that he told Georgia, give me the people and I'll get these things accomplished. Georgia gave him the two senators. First time ever, basically. No, he did not get that agenda accomplished. And the agenda that he's trying to get through now is in question at this point, considering that the infrastructure bills are basically being held up by two Democrats. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work on blackagendareport.com. Margaret, Prejudicial, you're the perfect person to talk to about this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Absolutely. So looking at Biden's numbers, and this is kind of pure research, the article is correct. This is the Washington Post article. I mean, he's basically lost 20 points among African Americans. Among the Hispanic, he has lost, about 16 points. And among the young, he's lost, I guess this is 15 points. Why? I mean, is it really just the issues of policy where he's dropping significantly? And this is over 2 months. This is not even over the entire term. This is him basically collapsing among these constituencies within a very short period of time. Are people just fed up with Biden not getting anything accomplished? What's going on?
Well, I think you just said it. There was so much hope after Trump was defeated, after places like Georgia won these two Democratic senators in a state that was previously red, that Biden would win a state like Georgia. But the majority in the Senate is not big enough, and you have the right-wingers, I don't know why people call them moderates, who are in effect controlling the agenda. So nothing is getting done that people wanted. We got the big COVID relief bill. That was a helpful thing. Well, more than helpful. I don't mean to say that in a trite-sounding way. But we still don't have student loan debt relief, still don't have an increase in the federal minimum wage, still don't have a national health insurance program, still don't have the things that people need the most, and we're still being told we can never get them. And so people see and why shouldn't they, see no reason to support someone when they're told that the biggest things are things they can never have. It can't just be politics as usual, or rather you can't maintain political support with politics as usual.
Agreed, especially going into a midterm.
Well, another side of this that I wanted to bring up that I brought up earlier is Afghanistan, where Afghanistan saw a serious plummet to his vote, and it was like everybody hitting him on the mainstream media all of a sudden. I think that just, Margaret, my take on this was it kind of percolates out pretty quickly in a way that internet babble doesn't quite as much necessarily.
Well, yes, it's people don't think as much about foreign policy usually, and that's unfortunate. But Afghanistan became a big news story because the withdrawal, which it's ironic because I think it's something most people wanted, a withdrawal from Afghanistan. People didn't want these forever wars, but it was mismanaged. And the imagery coming back was of America being incompetent.
Yeah.
People, most people want to withdraw not because they have like me, the left-wing anti-imperialist position. They just don't see a reason for it and don't want their money spent that way. But they still want to think that the United States is a competent country that can get certain things done in a way that they can have some satisfaction with. So the images of people hanging off of planes and the fact that they'd lost control of the airport, or some very basic things that were not done properly, were not helpful at all. And then, of course, he was attacked from the right. The media, even supposedly liberal media, attacked him from the right.
And the left. Everybody, and the left, notably, because the right's going to attack when the right's going to attack on pretty much anything that they can, I would say. But the left was attacking, MSNBC and CNN, who would, of course, always be in his corners, were suddenly coming out. And also partly was just the visual spectacle of these images of people dangling from planes flying away from the air bases. They were trying to get out with the American evacuations. Now, that's not necessarily, again, those aren't Americans dangling from those planes.
But it was in contrast to what Biden said was going to happen, though. That's the other thing, too.
And everybody saw it. It's just one of those images. And it's happening right now, and it's worse than what the kind of thing, because it's a plane, it's worse than what happened in Saigon. It's, hundreds of feet in the air. A helicopter, at least you have some ability to let them down.
Yes, it was, Americans like to be proud of their country. Most people do, and they like to think that things are being done well. And to see this thing mismanaged so very badly, the lack of preparation, and then Biden blamed the Afghan government. I mean, his comments were terrible.
I mean, these guys were basically standing there and getting slaughtered. And, part of that had to do with the way they were waging the war. I mean, the U.S. was instrumental in their ability to even maintain what they were trying to maintain in the situation. And we gave a deadline for when we were pulling out. The people were pulled out in these kind of weird, haphazard ways where the Taliban ends up taking it sooner. And many of Biden's comments didn't seem to line up with the reality of things on the ground, making him look incompetent. It's like, oh, we're not going to have that Saigon moment. Here's that Saigon moment. Oh, we're not going to have Americans. We're going to get these guys. You find out you have people left behind, and they don't even have a clear idea on how many. It was problematic, to put it mildly. And that, I agree with Shane that was a component of the thing that was basically digging into him. Right. This guy, Mondale Robinson, he is part of the Black Male Voter Project. And he makes this point of saying he remembers the exact moment his optimism that president would be different began to fade. And Democrats in May said they were willing to significantly weaken a police reform bill for Republican support. He also makes the point about he was dismayed by the push or not the push to not get rid of the filibuster. He was by the push to not push for $15 an hour minimum wage, that he didn't try to get the voting restrictions based on the GOP. I mean, these things are basically directly related to Biden said he was going to do X. Biden didn't do X. And we're now that much more disillusioned about our politics, making it that much more difficult for Biden to try to get anything accomplished coming up in the midterms. What effect do you think this is going to have? I mean, is it going to be one of those things where he could still make this argument of, look, we didn't get the things done that we said we were going to get done. However, you don't want a Republican in that office. Give us another 2 years. And honestly, is that even going to fly at this point?
No, it won't fly. And Democrats historically don't do well in the midterms.
Right.
Unless there's a Republican in office who's unpopular. So when Bush, towards the end of his term, his popularity had waned, and so the Democrats took control of the House. I think that was 2006. The last midterms before the presidential election, Trump's same thing. Trump's unpopular. Democrats win control of the House again. But he's the one there now. There's a Democrat there. And Democrats tend to, unfortunately, emphasize presidential elections and not midterms. So you're going to have a lot of apathy. I think voter turnout is going to drop. The only people who will be energized will be Republicans. So I think things are going to be even worse. That some very basic things that Biden can't seem to get any of those things done. And also, there was so much hype. Remember Bernie Sanders saying he's going to be the most progressive president since FDR. And then they must have tortured the progressives in the House. Lajaya said, I give him an A. And AOC said, he exceeds expectation. And that was a lot of BS. And now it shows.
Absolutely does. Well, there's a point that I wanted to get to. With us being a divided country, a Fox News watching crowd, Democrats on the other side, I don't know. There was a point that I wanted to get to. It just escaped my mind. I'm sorry, Margaret. Jamarl, would you be willing to step in for a second?
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. They were trying to get Biden to say all that stuff. I mean, I get the feeling that his will is there. He just doesn't necessarily either have the temperament, the stamina, or the capability of enacting that will. Meaning, I do think that on some level, if Biden had a magical wand, that he would push the stuff through. I accept that he wants it. But accepting that he wants it is secondary to the fact that his job is to get it done. I mean, it seems that he has no capacity for any kind of stick to get to get either Manchin, or for that matter, Sinema, online. I mean, because at this point, we're only talking about 2 Democrats that's basically holding up his agenda. And so if he got that agenda through, do you think it would make a difference in regards to the midterms? Let's say something happens and he finds some kind of immaculate stick with which to hit Sinema and Joe Manchin, and they finally fall on his side. I have no idea what Sinema is trying to get out of this because her polling has just been plummeting, and she doesn't necessarily seem to get any political advantage out of it. But if so, would that be the thing that gets him over the hurdle for the midterms? Because the fact is, if he loses either the House or the midterms, his presidency is basically over with at that point, correct?
I think so. The other problem is there's a lack of mobilization from below.
Yes.
So Americans are encouraged to vote, and that's it. Not encouraged to be active in any way. So people turn out to the polls, long lines, last November, and now nothing. So people vote and then hope.
Bless you.
Excuse me. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to hit mute before I sneezed.
You're fine.
And it's the same thing. We depend on these people to do things they don't want to do. So in the absence of any kind of pressure from the people, we're going to get nothing but gridlock, and that means next November a lower turnout, and especially a lower turnout of the people that the Democrats need.
But why? Why is that the case? I mean, because you're right. Ultimately, you have this thing of political pressure that gets these guys to do X or Y. And you have some of the people who, especially lefties, who basically made their claim to fame on this kind of public pressure, public support stuff. But in this situation, it's all been legislative. Why? What's their reasoning for not necessarily going the right of trying to getting the public involved into the political process to try to get these agenda over the finish line, especially considering the gravity of what's necessary for him to have any level of political clout going forward after the midterms?
Well, having public involvement is a dicey thing for them because then they can't count on being able to do what they want when they want to do it. All the backroom deal making, the compromise is a nice word, isn't it? The things that they want to do, then if you have the public involved, then it's harder to listen to the lobbyists who give you money. Then it's hard to do all of the things that the establishment wants to do. And the politics in this country continues to drift to the right, ever further to the right. The last thing they want is to hear people making demands about raising the minimum wage. They don't want a lot of political activity. They want voting. They want votes. But they do not want political action because that would make life harder for them.
Margaret, I had a lingering thought earlier that I want to sort of run by you because it kind of, I don't believe it, but it's a possibility that came to mind, which is that Trump isn't going to do as well. Biden is going to do a bit better than we're expecting, even if he continues to fail, simply because Trump was such a shock to that political ecosystem that, but Biden was always the comfortable cushion that we would land on to restabilize. And even though he's down in the polls, he's still going to be used as a cushion. The Democratic Party is still going to be seen as a refuge from the craziness of Trump, which of course lives on in the Republican Party and will probably invigorate whatever comes out of it in 2024. I mean, whatever your take on that, whether you think that maybe Biden's polling numbers aren't as significant, which is kind of what I'm getting at, or also this other question, which is what would Republicans be pushing for? I'll put it like this. Trump, all things considered, when you include, I understand there was a bunch of pushback on him, fairly weak presidency in a lot of ways. He sort of stuck by his guns for his base. A lot of Republicans were happy with some of the decisions he was making to keep pushing for the things he was wanting to, and it got in there, but he didn't actually get that much done. I was really underimpressed, particularly with his foreign policy, but broadly, kind of a weak presidency. Of course, media pushback included. Biden seems to be showing all the signs of the same thing. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have a particularly strong case going into it, and even though the Republicans will have a lead just because Biden's failing right now, Trump is still a fresh enough memory that I think they might be able to get something out of that. And I don't know what Republicans would be pushing for. I know what Democrats would be pushing for, which is an anti-Trumpism. I'm just not sure where Republicans would go. Either of those, I'm curious about your take, Margaret.
Well, I think the Biden-friendly media, they're already doing it. They talk about Trump all the time. I don't remember a former president being in the news this much. Now, of course, most former presidents disappear. They're not like Trump in that way. But they talk about Trump constantly. And I think their goal in doing that is to protect Biden, quite frankly. Just in case you have questions or demands to make of Biden, don't talk about that too much because you could get Trump again. You could get the Republicans again. So already they resurrect Trump. I think he's probably their biggest fundraising tool right now. So that's Trump is like the boogeyman or like the villain in Harry Potter. Don't even say his name. He could who could come back. And Republicans, they want Trump. They want Trump's the way he resonates with the base. That's what they want, but they don't want him. They were sick of him. He made their lives very difficult. They got what they wanted out of him, but they want him to disappear. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how they will make that decision.
That sounds like a failure to me.
He's still endorsing people. He's still denouncing people. And so the Republicans, I think, are in a quandary about how to deal with Trump. But having said that, I think they can still win if the Democrats have not energized their people.
I think that's uber ironic because the whole issue with Biden is like, well, yeah, Democrats don't necessarily want to bring in the crowd because once you bring in the crowd, you can't necessarily control it. They're going to have things that they want. And if you are not giving the crowd what they want, they're going to be somewhat belligerent towards you and your interests. And so all things being equal, let's just keep it legislative. Let's just try to pass the stuff, but let's not trespass on the crowd. Well, Donald Trump's, much of his publicity was the crowd. It was the mob. It was this notion that he had this huge groundswell of supporters where the Republican Party basically was cowed into bending the knee and going with the Trumpian policy where Trump would get an increase in African Americans, an increase in Hispanics that were voting for him. By the same token, was somewhat unruly in regards to the people that he was bringing into the political process. And so they didn't particularly like it. It's just an irony associated with the way that Democrats are handling it versus Republicans, and neither one wants the crowd to be involved into the politics of this stuff.
Can I throw one thing into this real quick, Jamarl, and I want to pass it back to you, Margaret? We were talking about Steve Bannon earlier. This is kind of related to this. Steve Bannon last night in Virginia was at this event in person that Trump called into, supporting Glenn Youngkin, who's, of course, the Republican candidate in the Virginia gubernatorial election. Glenn Youngkin did not show up to that event. So in other words, you could see that as a kind of snubbing, but also as an image of, okay, just where is this political space at right now? How accepting is the Republican Party of Trump? That was what happened. I don't know what the aftershocks of that are going to be on the inside or whatever for them, but it's just interesting to comment on. Based on what Margaret, either what Jamarl was saying or what I threw in there, I'm just curious. What do you think?
Well, I think it's fluid. I think nobody has figured out these things, right? This impact of a former president who became president by breaking the rules and continues to break the rules by not going away and encouraging people to try to overturn the vote. It's all kind of crazy. So they don't know what to do with him. But they, at the same time, they don't necessarily have to pay attention to him if the Democrats just keep messing up, and that is to say, not delivering. And that's what messing up is for Biden, not to deliver. I remember the day that it became official at least in the media, that he had enough electoral votes to win the election. And people here in New York and elsewhere, people literally went out into the streets. It was like a party in the streets because, ding dong, the witch is dead. And that kind of, to have that sort of excitement, to have that kind of support is it's something I had not seen in my life. And for that to descend into the same old, and people being told not to expect the things that they want, not to get any of those things, that is a recipe for political disaster.
Especially after you have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I mean, I get that. Have these Democrats be the ones standing in his way and standing in the way of us. So people know about Joe Manchin and they're angry with him and angry with Kyrsten Sinema. But most people don't understand how this works. They're like, I thought Biden won. I thought he had a majority in the Senate. Why don't we have X, Y, and Z? So that will increase cynicism, I believe. And or he'll have to compromise and do things that people don't want him to do. But that goes back to how the Democratic Party really works. There have always been Manchins and Sinemas in the Democratic Party who really lean right, and the party tolerates them. Sometimes they're the ones who are favored in primaries. They like these establishment people. So that's the way things really work. And people are seeing how what's the expression? You don't want to see how the sausage is made, and
right.
And so now you're seeing it.
But I'm also reminded of this article that I read recently, which is looking demographically, and it was David Shore and another guy who were sort of featured as debating this point in the article. Not in the article itself, but over articles they've written, essays they've written and stuff. Basically, two different ways of looking at the Democrats right now. Either they, and this is kind of the point that you were making, Margaret, they're not doing enough. They're not getting progressive enough. They're not doing enough to actually mobilize the base. They're not doing enough of that kind of thing to get people out there. The other take, which was the sort of controversial one in the article, was that generationally, they're out of touch. The way that Democrats are pushing these progressive policies isn't actually going to appeal to the majority of the American public, who would probably agree with them on a lot of this stuff. But instead, you have largely white, liberal, 20-somethings, early 30-something college graduates who staff these political organizations, who serve as the aides for these politicians, who go on to serve in the media, which serve as an echo chamber. And even though a lot of the policies that they're talking about, most people in the public would want better health care, for instance. Of course, most people in the public would want a bunch of the stuff they're talking about. The idea is the way they're messaging it is kind of out of touch. I can see both of those cases, but I wanted to throw that other one in there too. What do you think of that, Margaret?
I don't know. I think I think if people got what they wanted, things would be supposedly left. Things are because it's such a conservative country, things that are considered far left that everybody else in the world gets. But the problem is not messaging. People want that stuff. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the problem is this dependence on the Democratic Party is a loser for people to get the things that are quite popular and that most people would like, because you have this establishment party, a corporate party that is nominally the left wing, but not really, and people are convinced that they don't have any other choice but to keep putting this party in power, because look at those evil Republicans, still end up not getting what you want.
Yeah, they feel stuck in some way. And not just stuck, it's this feeling and this kind of awareness that the reason they're not backing these policies, I mean, if you go down the list with the polling, the overwhelming majority of the public wants either Medicare for all or some kind of government interaction in healthcare. Overwhelming majority wants the expansion of Social Security. I mean, you can go down the list for item by item by item. And I think the public gets it on some level that the reason that these things aren't either pushed as bills or aren't made into law is because of who's paying the other political actors in this process. And that burns them. I mean, cynicism is cancerous for this kind of get out the vote campaign that's necessary in order to win during the midterm. But that's basically what we have. Biden got his COVID thing through, but keep in mind, Donald Trump was also trying to get a COVID thing through, so it's not even something that's separate and distinct from what the other political party was going to do.
Trump was the one who was pushing for it, and that's the point that the Republicans can make, even though it might be a weird one for them to make, considering their stance on the debt ceiling. But Trump was the one who was trying to get the bill passed, and Nancy Pelosi was obstructing it, so the Democrats could claim that victory after they assumed Biden won. You know,
that's exactly what happened. I'm curious, if Prejudicial, your book, came out, let's say, today, what would be the insertion on Biden up to this point? I mean, yes, it's only been a year, but, I mean, let's be honest. If Biden loses the House or he loses the Senate, his presidency is basically over. He has no capacity to get anything through at that point.
I think the message is that well, especially as for Black people, that our politics have devolved. For us, I think more than any other group, our politics now consist of keeping Republicans out of office. And so we continue to put up with the Democrats who don't have the courage of their convictions, or who really are right-wingers, and call that a success. But it's never a success for us. It's never a success for people getting what they need. So Bill Clinton was very popular with Black people, but so many look at the right-wing policies. Welfare so-called reform, which increased poverty, the media consolidation that took place on his watch. There were so many things that he did that were against the interests of people who consider themselves progressives. And so we're in this constant struggle. And then, of course, with somebody like Trump, who embodies, the worst nightmare, especially for Black people, someone who appeals to racism and wins because of it. And we're told that anybody else is better. So it's a continuation of what we've been struggling against. But the message, as always, is we get progress when we are active. When we are active outside of the electoral arena, that's when the people always benefit.
But here's the thing, Margaret. We're almost out of time. And I was debating closing it here because we've just been talking about so much. I know we're going to have calls. I'm pretty sure we will at least. But you should keep going. You're saying that Trump is like Black people's worst dream here. I'm not a Black person, but I can see other alternatives. Like Kamala Harris, for instance, kind of out of left field candidate, but she is like a Black person who had a career based on putting Black people in prison out in the Bay Area. That's her thing. I don't remember Trump doing that. And it's like that would be her would be this horrible mixture of like apparent representation, but actual criminality on the most basic level. I don't want to just, what's your take on that, Margaret?
Absolutely right. That's why she's not very popular. That's why she, I believe, would be the worst candidate. People would not vote against her. They just wouldn't turn out in the numbers she would need in order to win. People haven't forgotten that stuff. But that's the other problem of thinking you have to stay in this tent. That you have, people called her Cop Mala, and didn't forget that stuff. And I think she would be the worst candidate for the reason you just said.
Yeah, I keep saying there's no way she would ever be president. She's too unlikable. I mean, even the laughing at the truancy violations where she was threatening putting her mom in prison. And it's this kind of just creepy giggle that goes around with it that is greatly uncomfortable because it's kind of out of whack with whatever she's saying in the particular moment. Shane.
Margaret, did you see a couple of more like culture than anything, but before we close out, did you see the video with Kamala and these kids with like space camp and she's trying to...
Yeah, it's like NASA. She's the Space Council leadership or something to that effect. And she did these videos with these kids talking about, it was NASA and whatnot.
I did not see it.
Check it out. I know you did see this one, and I know that we haven't had you on since we, since this happened. I don't believe we have, at least. AOC and the Met Gala, while we're talking about the degradation of the promise, progressive policies and this whole thing. What did you think about that? I know it's a little bit old at this point, but...
Well, it's never old. Look, you can't be the progressive icon and go to the Met Gala. Yeah. Lack of, period. You can't. The thing that sticks with me is her lack of savvy. And that she would think that...
Well, what do you mean, Margaret? She had the tax the rich thing on the back of her dress.
Oh my God, it was just so cringeworthy.
It was tacky.
And then she follows it up with the vote on the supporting the
Iron Dome.
Iron Dome.
And then weeping.
She says she's going to vote no, and she changes it to just voting present, and then she's going to cry. It's like she's not ready for prime time.
No.
A lot of hype with her. And she does herself in. She's just not that serious.
I remember saying myself much of the same the day this stuff broke out. I was like, at the very least, it's bad optics for her. She just doesn't know how to handle this. Assume that she's a cold-hearted politician, that she thinks this is going to go across well. Forget all true believer stuff, where she's convinced herself that, I can make my point on this big stage, which is what she would convince herself of. But assume that that's not the main thing in her mind. And she's just like trying to make a play. She's trying to make a move. A bad move, as was revealed by all of the internet memes that replaced the tax the rich, wall style. It's because the lettering is based on like the Pink Floyd's Wall, that album cover with like the blood on the wall thing. Yeah. That replaced that with everything else. She was the subject of memes. She still is. She's launched her own new like subspecies of a family of memes. And it's a joke, of course, but the point is that was a notably bad optical situation for her to put herself into perpetuity going forward.
You pointed out that the woman who made the tax the rich dress owed taxes.
Oh yeah, owed taxes. Yeah, a multimillionaire who owed hundreds of thousands of taxes in other states. Margaret, we got to close. But any last thoughts here?
Well, I think she did herself. She did the worst thing you can do in politics. She lived up to the worst thing said about her. She lived up to what her detractors have said. And the only way out for her is to really fight back against the Nancy Pelosi, who you could see on video on C-SPAN yelling at her, and then she changes her vote. So she and the rest of the progressives have to stop being phony, stand up for the people, which means really being revolutionary, because that's not what their party wants them to be. But if she doesn't want to be a joke anymore, that is what she would have to do.
Margaret, thank you for joining us. We're going to close it out here. Margaret Kimberly, always fun talking with you.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you. For those listening, that was Margaret Kimberly, senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report, also author of Prejudential: Black America and the Presidents. Follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. Find her work at blackagendareport.com. Might have heard it a couple of minutes ago, but we're going into our break. And when we come back, we're going to be taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320. We've got about 10 minutes to talk, folks. Now's the time. Coming back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking your calls, and we're talking. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, 202-521-1320 is the phone number. I want to go to the Francis Hogan thing for a minute, and I want to get somebody on to talk about this as soon as tomorrow, hopefully, because Michael Tracy, journalist, sort of controversial dude at this point in a weird way, part of this new Substack wing, along with Glenn Greenwald, where people are going crazy over them being more to the right, I think, but also more populist than people are expecting of left-wing politicians.
I can reach out to him if you want. He's been on my show a few times.
Michael Tracy?
Yeah.
Be fantastic. Hey, we tried to get him for a long time on the show, and he just hasn't, he's doing his thing. I think some of the handles scared him away. Anyway.
Send him a meeting now. I'll send him a thing now.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Yeah, he had this great article out going back over Francis Hogan and what she was saying. And I hadn't seen this specific clip. At least I don't believe that I had from the testimony a week plus ago, where she's being questioned, and basically she goes into how Facebook has a counter-espionage team, which on the one hand doesn't surprise me, but on the other hand is really worth being surprised by in some sense, in a deeper sense. Wait, Facebook has a counter-espionage team that does counterterrorism work? And her whole point when she was testifying was, wow, we should really be staffing them more. She was working on that team. That was what she was doing, at least in part, while she was at Facebook. And then she was saying, this is a significant national security threat. They don't have enough people on their basically their counter-intel team. They don't have enough people. What weirds me out about this one thing is that, okay, it's just more, I always have this sense, is this person a spook? Is this person in some way associated with the CIA when there's this random story? It has to do with the legal system. They're a whistleblower. They get a bunch of attention. Was this person put up to this? Or is this person in some way involved with the agency or an agency in a way that might, make them want to do something? Well, this seems kind of spooky. I'll put it like that. The counter-intel team at Facebook, which is my second point, isn't it bizarre that Facebook has a freaking counter-intel team? They're we talked about WikiLeaks as a non-state. What was the term that Pompeo used to sort of
non-state something actor,
non-state
hostile
foreign
actor,
intelligence service or something, non-state intelligence service, that kind of thing, non-state hostile intelligence service. Facebook has its own intelligence service. What does that mean about Facebook? I'm not saying they're in a class with WikiLeaks, of course. I'm saying they're assuming the responsibilities of a state, along with, I'm assuming, the United States, but probably other countries, spy on and do all this stuff, and they're formalizing it into a specific group of people who work in the company, who we're going to be pushing to get, more people should work there. And who are those people going to work with? They're going to probably work with the CIA, the NSA, and Facebook. They're going to be an intermediary between these groups. It makes sense that this is happening. I'm just saying, this is the formal structure. This is the face of that horrible process, the sign of the times kind of thing that we're living through right now. I'm opposed to it personally. That's what I'm trying to get clear about, because some people might be for a counter-intel team inside of Facebook. I don't think that's the right way to handle it.
To play devil's advocate, if you're Facebook or Twitter and you're dealing with basically the globe, we know that the military, U.S. military, in and of itself uses sock puppet accounts in order to push narratives, in order to try to get people eyes on a particular subject. But it's not just us that do it. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, pretty much all of these countries use this kind of device for their own ends of trying to, for their own, I don't know what you want to call it, their own propagandistic efforts. And so is it crazy for Facebook to say, okay, we don't want our platform to be used in that capacity, and we have some kind of counter intel, whatever you want to call it, to push back against that and to specifically try to identify those particular items? I don't think that's necessarily crazy. I mean, especially since it's a U.S. company, and it's probably will be far more open to allowing, even if it doesn't say it, the U.S. military or intel within the country itself to push those narratives out while trying to prevent other countries from doing the same. That's kind of my thought in going into it, but I guess that's the best possible light.
But do I trust? If I trusted the CIA and the NSA, I probably would be more willing to go along with this thing. But why can't they just do it in the normal way, where these guys have to get court orders?
Oh, dude, I'm not saying it's great.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a degradation.
I'm just trying to think of the best possible light. If it was like benefit of the doubt, how would that?
National security state wants to secure the nation. The nation. They want to do that kind of thing. That's their prerogative. I get that. That's their incentive.
And by the way, do we know that this is directly linked to the CIA at this point, or is this just the language of internal company?
This is me talking about it.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. None of this is. I'm trying to be clear in my language. It's all speculative. I don't mean to give anybody the wrong impression. But Facebook has a counter-espionage team, and Francis Hogan seems to me like a spook. That's what I'm getting. That's what I'm saying here. To be clear and to put everything in brackets. We have callers on the line. I want to make sure we get to them. Eric calling in from Florida. Eric, you're on. What's going on?
The Houthis in Yemen are about to win the war. I don't know if you guys follow that very much, but it's like one of the most important proxy wars going at the moment. It's between the U.S. and Israel.
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia mainly.
Yeah. We gave them the green light. Obama gave Saudi Arabia the green light to basically wage that war because he wanted them to stay out of messing with the JCPOA. And Saudi Arabia's, it's going to be quick, it's going to be fast. Nonsense. That war has been bloody. They've weaponized starvation. They've routinely just killing civilians in large numbers. Weaponized disease. Yeah, this has been a grisly issue. But you're right. The Houthis have been able to basically stand up against like the 5th most expensive military in the world, Saudi Arabia, or something to that effect. And they've still been going with it.
Our help too, so it's kind of like us too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, go on. Eric, what else were you saying there?
Yeah, so like if you look up the parties to the war, right, it's the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, not just Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you that part.
We don't talk about that quite as much. I mean, partly because a lot of what we're doing, it seems, is arming Saudi Arabia. Of course, they don't just buy arms from us.
Not just that, Lee. Not just that. There is a U.S. Navy admiral or something like that in Riyadh who gives them all the intelligence for all their airstrikes. So, like, if it was not for the U.S., they would not be able to, conduct any air operations.
No, that is true.
Valid point. My name is not Lee, however.
Yeah.
You've confused me for my father.
Everything else was a valid point except for that.
Many do. I'm a better man than he is. No, I'm just kidding. That's the classic. No, I'm just kidding, Eric. I love my dad.
But you're right. The bombing things was one of those things that our ships were helping them run. And if you remember, there came a point where we were like, okay, we're no longer doing that. But that was that point. We had basically sold them the ships necessary in order to be able to refuel these things in the air. Shane, please.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, I know. Here's the thing: we got have other callers. Eric, any other last comments before we move on?
About the Silicon Valley, it's like a convergence of the Democratic Party and the U.S. intelligence community. So it's kind of like a military junta that is controlling the politics. That's about it.
You went from A to B to C there pretty quickly. Eric, thank you for the call. I wouldn't consider Silicon Valley a military junta just because there are some spooks over there. And Eric Schmidt moved directly from the CEO of Google to working with the military-industrial complex. That's pretty suspicious, and that's characteristic. But they also push back on this stuff. I remember looking earlier this year, watching the testimonies of Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Sundar Pichai, the CEOs, of course, of Facebook, Twitter, Google, respectively. And Jack Dorsey was the one that stood out. But there was pushback. It wasn't just like, okay, we're going to fork over all your data. The reason they're having all these meetings, the reason they're bringing these people before, taking them to task basically, is because these companies aren't doing as much as they want them to.
Yeah.
These companies naturally are stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of, wait, do we suppress more content, or do we do what a lot of our users want us to do, which is just let them use the platform unmoderated? But you get my point. It's not like these companies have sided over. In fact, if anything, some of these people stand as a bulwark.
They're going to browbeat in the forum.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing take place in public. Anyway, let's go to Tammy calling in from Bethesda. Tammy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yes, I'm calling about the Democrats. Well, that's why I left the Democrats back in 2000. We should have left the Democrats a long time ago and started our own party. However, we didn't, so I knew the Republicans and the Democrats was in the same bed, so, yep.
I mean, does it make you somewhat cynical of the political process when you have Biden or Obama screaming hope and change, and you get Joe Biden coming in saying, I'm going to do all of these things, it's the most progressive president since FDR, and then basically hasn't passed any of that stuff, be it $15 an hour minimum wage, be it the voting rights bill, be it the George Floyd bill, all of these things basically that they said they were going to do are basically on the sideline. Does that make you more cynical of the political process and trying to support any particular party or any particular candidate?
Yep, so what I started doing, I started putting my own name on the ballot.
An absolute act of self-defiance. Not running, but none of these, you don't trust any of these people.
Yeah, it's like voting is important, so I'm definitely going to vote. But
or just myself, yeah.
Right, my own name.
You go back to a movie he was saying who was running with the welfare reform. It was what? It was the military. It was the military. Putting these women, if you got welfare benefits, get them out to work. I'm like, oh my gosh. Even though I was a stay-home mom, that wasn't the issue.
Tammy, we've got to close it out. We're at the end of our hour.
All right.
I didn't quite get where you're going in there at the end, but I liked your call. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it. Please call back sometime. We got to close the show out, everybody. Thank you for listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. Signing off. See you on the other side.